Morning. So I hope you are enjoying. Yesterday it was a very long day, but some of you could stay until the concert. It was amazing, but we are making videos and so on. It was participatory and very good. I hope you enjoyed the Qigong this morning. And now, not to get more late, we start the session of today, in which we have Thomas Knigge to talk about We Are Nature. Thomas, you can come. And Sylvia is around or not? Yeah. Sylvia, you are the chair. Do you prefer to be there? It's better because when I'm here, I cannot see so well. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, and welcome back to the WeOcean, the planetary organism conference that we are having these days. And today we have three fantastic speakers. Oi, can you hear me? Yes? Okay, yeah. I am Silvia Gomez, well, my name. I am social cultural anthropologist, okay, from the Autonomous University of Barcelona. And I am the chair of this session of this morning. And well, just to introduce a little bit, yesterday we navigated through physics, philosophy, biology, plenty of disciplines. And today we are going to start a journey through knowledge systems, design, technology, and local communities as well. So the first speaker is Thomas Knigge. Knigge. Sorry.
Knigge.
Knigge. Okay, Thomas is a researcher and senior lecturer in biology at l'Université de Havre, Normandie, en France. Yeah. Oui. And well, he's gonna talk about how our Western scientific perception hampers our reconciliation with nature from his experience in ecotoxicology. So nature. Okay?
Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah, I have the microphone. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for organizing, the organizers for this great event here. Thank you, Joseph, for forcing me to give a speech. So, can I see something? Well, anyway, so the introduction has been made, and waiting for some problems. But well, so I don't know. But then I just it's not so important. The first slide, then I just go on. Then I'm saying that there's a sort of a prelude, and it will end with something about mythology as well. So I just would like to recall that mythology is about the sea, its mysteries, its secrets, very much, its danger, and that it presents to coastal populations has been very present amongst coastal populations. And, well, it's gone. And ever since humans invented legends. Oh, there it is. Invented legends about spirits and goddesses that live or that are related to the sea. So, and they did that to honor the resources provided by the sea, and also to deal with the power and the menace that the sea is constituted. So, to seek not on the other side of the globe, I went back to the Greeks. And so we see in antiquity that Pontus, primordial god of the Greeks, he personified the sea. And together with Gaia, he founded Nereus over there, who was the father of the beautiful Nereids that danced with the dolphins and the seahorses, and that stirred up the sea, and that calmed the sea according to their mood. So and we have the titans also, Oceanos and Tethys, who fathered the Oceanites, and eventually there's Poseidon and Amphitrite, who are the parents of Triton. And I just found this the other day on Sunday here at the coast, at Dolau. So it's still somehow present, these myths. Well, that is to say that storytelling about the ocean and the sea and nature is a most ancient way of understanding how life began, what surrounds us, and how things are related to each other. And yet these myths are, well, in some parts of the world at least, no longer needed to explain the modern world. We have replaced them by rational thinking and scientific mythology. And specifically in Europe, philosophy invented something else. So I'll come to that. Now, before coming to the point what happened and how this happened, I'd like to explain why I, as a biologist, come to wander into unknown areas. Some of you know probably better and more experts about this. Well, one of the reasons is the Transocean Working Group. So this interaction with colleagues in the Transocean Working Group brought me to change thinking. But it's something that goes back also to a time before I was a student, actually. So indeed, as an ecotoxicologist, what I would do normally, and I should do perhaps, is to talk about pollution, how animals exposed to toxic substances, here's waste, this is, by the way, my model organism, how they are affected by the pollution, what the risks are when these animals are exposed to toxins, and this is, well, the final objective is to inform industry, to inform the society, to inform the politics about these risks. And, well, in the best of all cases, this would lead to banning harmful substances. Here we have some examples of that, famous examples, which is DDT, which has been banned. I think in some places it can be still used. Or bisphenol A. I took this example because you see this quite a lot, bisphenol A3 on bottles and things. So there are other chemicals that we discuss, like the neonicotinoids. It's a pretty French example because we have a discussion in France where it's supposed to be banned since 2018. And still we go back and forth, and still it's there. So these are chemicals that are highly persistent in nature. So why? Because they do not occur in nature. They are not natural. And so one of the questions that I ask myself, why do we produce substances that are not natural? I know why, but the question is more like we shouldn't. And I found this in Forbes. I found this very interesting because perhaps I'm now someone, or with this talk, someone that could be accused of anti-science environmentalist, which I am not. But, so other things that made me sit up recently and wonder are the news about the loss of biodiversity, which you all heard of course, and which you are certainly all that are here sensible to, or sensitive to, excuse me. So we're losing a lot of biodiversity, but this I heard in the radio some while ago, and the strange thing that made me wonder was the way the news anchor talked about it, how he presented it. It's like something happening outside, which we are not concerned of. So especially, you focused on mammals. This was where I like, whoops, we are mammals, aren't we? So why does that not affect us? Same, we are steering towards a sixth mass extinction. That's something that I teach to my students in the frame of co-evolution of plants and insects. And, well, some while ago, 2002, it's been entitled Breaking News, which it is not, no longer. And, well, the point is, I just need this to not lose my, my feeling or my experience now that I'm more than 20 years ecotoxicologist is that what we do as scientists has a very little effect in the end in politics. That brought me to this. So we hear all this and we seem to be detached from it. So it's something we analyze, something we provide data for, and so it's something apart, somewhere else. It's something that we're not concerned by directly. So this is what made me wonder, and where my question is, what is actually our relation to these living beings? Interestingly, I have to go back to this one, because there are also plants here. So this is interesting as well. We hear a lot about animals and so on. Their plants are also concerned. So it really concerns all kind of living beings. And so the question is, this I introduced, and actually I started reading this some while ago. And you can see, this is very famous, probably quite a lot of you will know it. Simon Sprint and Rachel Carson, and it was about the DDT especially, and about other pollutants, pesticides mostly. And it's from 1962. I read that some while ago. I was like, oops, this is all very actual, timely. It's like, since 1962, nothing much has happened. DDT got banned, but still. We replace it by other things. The bisphenol A has been replaced by bisphenol F and by bisphenol S. And so we start all over again. So this is a publication. Actually, well, the book is from 1962, but this is from 2022, saying that it's still resonating today. And you read the book and you think, wow, how is this possible? So my feeling, and this is what brings me to not talk about ecotoxicology and about pollution, is I have the feeling I'm Sisyphus, or we are part of being Sisyphus. We provide data, we do research, we do science over and over and over again without that it has any effect. So, there are ecotoxicologists here, so I don't know how they feel about that. And so my question is it inevitably humans versus nature? Is it true that humans and nature are not a good combination? I read that or heard that somewhere recently. Or can it be humans with nature? And there is something that we hear quite often, reconnect to nature. And this is some linguistic subtlety. Can we reconnect to nature? Can we reestablish our relationship to nature? What is it, in fact, this relation to nature? That is the question. And can we heal nature, or can nature heal us? And this, I do think, depends on the idea that we have on nature, or what that means nature. So we use that inevitably. We all the time use nature. We heard it yesterday, we will hear it today, all the time we will talk about that. Nature and us, right? And I came over this here, that's a French philosopher, anthropologist, Philippe Descola. Certain persons here will know him. And he has lived amongst a tribal of Native Americans in South American rainforest, and for a couple of years. And he coined this saying, nature does not exist. So when I heard that the first time, I was a bit puzzled and sort of like denying what would that, but then again, that's intriguing. What does that mean? Nature does not exist. That conceptually was not possible for me to realize what that meant. So that was intriguing me, and I went into it. And actually, he tells, from living amongst these Aqua, that they do not have a conception of nature. At least not as we do. This is the interesting thing about it. They're animists. We heard yesterday also was mentioned animism. So Descola considers this, and in this animated world, in fact, what surrounds us, the other living beings, but even rocks and streams and other things, they have souls. And what is important is they are attributed intentions, and they put on the same cognitive and moral level. The moral level is interesting, as we, as humans. So we're equal. And and they exchange. So Descola provides a specific definition of animism, which he opposes to naturalism. So animism, I think everybody has an idea what that means. He provides a specific definition of it, saying it's a continuity of inner worlds to which we belong. We're part of these inner worlds. Naturalism is a dichotomy of inner and outer worlds. So we have our inner world, and there is the outer world. And this is exactly the impression that I got when I heard the news, and very often. So I followed discussions by philosophers, and well, it turns out, and I didn't realize that before, but nature is simply a concept. It's a concept. A man-made designation, linguistic construction, and an abstract category. And so my question is, to you, how do you connect yourself to an abstract category? I feel the more and more that that is not possible. So, and I'm not the, I found, of course, citations, and this is someone who had a big project about these things, and this is one of the reasons I think that hampers us to connect. So this goes back to a philosophical invention, if you want, in Europe. Goes back to Descartes. He says, "I think, and therefore I am." And well, the other ones don't think, and they don't feel, and they're machines. We have heard about that yesterday. So animals, plants, more animals, but it has been animal machine, but there's plants and other things. They are machines. They are understandable. They're predictable. They follow natural laws, and they're usable. Well, of course, but they're repairable. That is an interesting aspect. So it means somehow we can repair what we destroy. They're designable. That is another thing. So we have this consideration of nature from a mechanistic standpoint, which in a way puts us apart. So We heard about that also yesterday. We heard about bioengineering, synthetic biology, and if you look at this bacterial flagellum, and there is a lot of other examples I could provide, I hesitated which one, it looks pretty much like a machine. And it's something that I tell my students, that proteins work like nanomachines. That's really amazing. It's what I love, really. But so there's truth in it. Huh? This thinking, well, it leads us also to creating nature, huh? and to uncouple from maybe even from evolution. And so, so far so good. Now, what do we do with this statement, nature does not exist? And how do we reconcile these things, that nature is a machine and it works a lot like a machine, but is there something beyond? So that is, in a way, a question. And I come back to this statement that nature is a concept. And this has been also recognized, well, first on the linguistic level, some conferences, that the definition given by the Oxford English Dictionary is it's nature is opposed to humans and human creations. Now this, I think, has been changed, and this is actually the question: what do we do with this? So we can agree or we can disagree, but what do we make of it? What is the conclusion of it, right? And well, this is difficult to tell, and in fact, but I think it's the essence really of philosophy is to question concepts, to question terms, and if we recognize that it is a concept, nature is a concept, then basically it should be possible to change a concept, shouldn't it? I mean, somehow in the logic, I think. And somehow I get signs that I have to hurry up. And if we acknowledge these things, that language and concepts structure our thinking, then we can perhaps do other things. There's a French philosopher, Pierre Charbonnet, who said that ecology should not kill modernity. But then this is, again, it's all about what is modernity, what is progress, what is, these are things that, and progress can be, in fact, I teach that to my students, it can be going back to ancient, more ancient ways or more agricultural practices, for example, that have been done in the past. That will be the future, in fact, that's pretty sure. So what is progress, what is modernity, so I think what is needed is to change our physiological concepts, our perception. I noted also here art and music can be means of doing that. And then to go back to the mythology, because in fact animism is a very, very common concept, whereas naturalism, dualism, is a very singular one. And many people on Earth still have these feelings about nature, this way to approach nature, to understand nature. And so these things have not been lost. And here's an example, the Bajau people. They still explain weather and the sea and everything around them by the deities that inhabit all that surrounds them, that connect them to the ocean, and that practically explains what perhaps they cannot explain. So their storytelling emphasizes the importance of respecting the sea and its resources. And so these rituals, they honor the nature. And this is what I think what we need to develop is a different concept of where there's reciprocity, where there's a concept of giving and taking, and taking care of the nature and protect it. And this is more and more introduced into restoration projects. Another example is in Micronesian. This I like because there's scientists and indigenous people that work together on these concepts. So it introduces and combines both, the best of both worlds, I hope. So this, well, I'll squeeze out. And here you have something to read from Pessoa. Well, let me take some questions.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. Very anthropological as well.
You think so?
Yes.
You'll do it better. Tell about that.
We have time for one or two questions from the public. Yes? Karina. Oh, yes. Okay.
Yeah, first, thank you very much for this presentation. Very interesting. I would like to know if you have thought about the difference between animism and monotheism. So I was thinking while you were speaking that when we think about monotheism, it's like we are above nature because we are superior.
There's an interesting passage in a book from Robin Wall that compares a myth, how the world was created by Sky Woman, and she compares that with Christian Genesis. Well, you have to read both. I feel much more touched by the myth, but I have not. I know, but I have not integrated that. It's a bit difficult. There's different monotheistic religions. I'm not an expert of all of them. And it introduces superiority as well, I think.
You have to,
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Okay.
Another question?
Yeah. So I'll stay here.
Yes, sorry. Thank you very much for this very interesting talk. I think it's really important, like to dive into this nature, culture, nature, society division. I wanted to ask, because you also said like the problem that we have, that we as scientists provide data, but it doesn't translate into praxis, and that it is something apart from society. So I was wondering, do you have like a methodological solution or some idea how to overcome this problem of detachment?
Well, I don't have a solution. Just propose that we think about concept and that we may change our concept. How do we do that? I personally feel that I'm somewhere on the way in doing that, but not completely. I changed my attitude to plants and things like that. But well, that's personal. Within the society, I don't know, but we have to discuss it, and it's discussed a lot. So that is a beginning. Where that will lead to, and where it's not a solution. Patricia will talk about education. I think that is perhaps something where it can be introduced and transferred to future generations, or change something in the mindset. But we can change our mindset as well, I think. Paulo, you had a question? Or
There is time. Okay. No, rapidly.
Rapid.
No, thank you so much, first of all. So the conceptualization is something that our mind do to understand the reality or one part of the reality. Okay, but the reality exists. In the moment you define, even you mention nature and humans or nature against humans, ontologically you separate the two.
Yeah.
But based on what we have seen yesterday,
All the time.
the way we function, the unit of functioning of nature and life,
Come.
from bacteria to humans, is absolutely the same. So it's something that maybe is just much more close to our Western and Christian Catholic perception of nature, because depending on the way you translate the Aramaic verb that humans should dominate or take care or manage nature, this is much more related to our culture.
This is what happened when Darwin proposed his theory of evolution.
Yeah, so shifting from one way of thinking to another one is just an exercise we can do, like training in the... so
I think
like
this is
training. So thanks so much for triggering such discussions, because this may help to do such a jump.
That's the point.
I know.
Well, we continue with the next speaker. That is Cristiano Pedroso Rosado. Yes. Sorry for the pronunciation. Maybe, yes, it's good. Okay. That comes from Universidade de Lisboa. And he's a microbiologist working on multidisciplinary research on inclusive design for greater well-being for humans and non-humans. Okay? So, and you are going to speak about notes on how to engage local communities in nature-centered perspective.
Yes.
Yeah?
Hi. Good job. Yes. Hi. First of all, good morning. Thank you, Joseph. Thank you, the organizers, for all of this. It's so good to be in this place, but it's better to be in here. I have been in this place for the last 2 years contemplating. And contemplation is part of my research, which is much more a practice-based research than research on the lab doing whatsoever. But we all know that conservation is not intervention, but invasive species are out there, and we can see one right here. Corpo brutus edulis, as known as ice plant. And in the last month, I took the chance to remove some of the ice plant from the rock. The ice plant works by casting a shadow and changing the pH of the soil, avoiding these beauties of the Portuguese nature to be there. The Petrosedums, the Armerias, and so on. So I did this in the last month. And as you can see, I took the left side photo on Friday, and we can see some greenies appearing. So I believe it's working. So the shadow is no longer there. The soil seems to be restoring. Interestingly, this place is not only a place for contemplation for me, but also for others. So people can get very creative on these sites. They cast love on the rock. They cast holes to incentivize whatsoever these connections we have with nature, with coastal sites, and with rocks. And I was here, and I saw a van approaching to me with a man inside. And the man said this. Now, we can have a choice. We can be very polite and choose to respond with option A, or we can be kind of rude and react as option B, or we can be like normal people and just go away because we don't like people approaching out of nowhere. This is what happens when we engage with local communities, either formally or informally. One-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-many, many-to-one. It's much more on the psychological side than on our expertise. And my presentation is this, is notes on perspectives, on how to engage with local communities, humans and non-humans. And my work is very much inspired by the methodological mindset developed throughout the House of the Sea Sails European project, which I won't be talking about because the next presentation is about this. And thank you, Professor Nuno, for the opportunity to engaging me in this project, because it was a very interesting chance to pursuing interdisciplinarity, interdisciplinarity with this beautiful side inside the research which we don't see often. So thank you, Nuno. The first case is coming from the Portuguese pilots from the House of the Sea Sails, which happened in Lisboa and Oeiras, and the connection with the river. We engaged a lot of people in the co-design process, which was about to happen throughout the entire process. While engaging in a multi-stakeholder forums, we know that the co-design bottom-up processes, it's unusual that the bottom-up decision-making can take longer with the local authorities, which are often used to top-down decisions and to take the expertise to take the decisions. And our role was to decentralize the decision-making to be as inclusive as we could, and to invite other types of profiles, I mean the creative, to be also inside the decision-making process. So a lot of people, but the result is magical. The result is magical. The first photo shows a collective bottom-up participatory session in one of the most gentrified neighborhoods in this country. And look, intergenerational, intercultural, a co-design process with games happened in here, and also throughout food. But we could do this co-design process, invitational process, also inside boats, as you can see on the top left, where the sound of those who have no voice were also brought up to the decision-making process. What do the fishes have to say of the boat journey? We don't care. We don't ask. So we asked this. And also one of the most known collective convivial action, collective food, with food that was developed in order to have a regenerative action on the local area. So it is not what is there to be explore, to be eaten, is what can we develop in order to restore, to regenerate the water. And so the challenges for inclusiveness are all of them. So it takes time to develop all the relationships with the local communities because we do not belong there. They are there. We do not belong. How to belong? It takes time. Tensions comes from the day zero, are unpredictable, and we have to be there to stay and remain throughout the process, to enter into this word here, which the experts don't quite like, because I have the authority of knowledge, so you just... No, we have to negotiate with the local culture, with the local knowledge. Language. People do not know the scientific jargon. They don't. They don't know. So we have to convert all of this knowledge that is powerful into powerful insights that can be comprehended by them. It's so obvious. And then we have to do all of this, avoiding the dropouts of they have agendas, they have lives to take, and we are inviting them. How can we create this relationship and to build this as a community? And not to mention the bureaucracy, the legal aspects, not only in the design process, but also in the implementation. When we are talking about nature-based solutions, it's a mess. As you know much better than me. Then the second case is a case that was supported from TBA 21, the Thyssen-Bornemisza Art Contemporary, and a fantastic place in Valladolid called Abadia Retuerta. And so they are a farm, a finca, with a luxury hotel in the middle of nowhere. And they saw the opportunity to perform a reforestation project in 90 hectares of them, but they believe, can we do this with art? And so we were there to implement a practice-based contemplative work in a design to help them to do this. And the briefing was to challenge this concept of renaturalization, to understand what is a forest and what constitutes the intelligence of a forest. So this concept of agency of a forest, to ask what type of value a forest can give to this company, to this context, and to introduce some sort of action that can activate all of these while we answer to this fantastic idea. And one of the particularities of this site is it is nearby the Douro River, but 150 years ago, in Quintanilha de Onésimo, they created a second river, a canal, because this newborn city, Valladolid, as it was expanded, the requirements for consumption of water was increasing, so they created this river. So we cannot distinguish anymore today who is who. So the domestication process of nature at its best and working towards the human needs. It's unbelievable. So how can we include all of this context into a collective intelligence decision process with the local communities, humans and non-humans? So you can imagine this is beautiful, all the vineyards, the luxury hotel. And so our idea was to cast a forest inside a forest, but a more real forest than the domesticated forest they had. And the proposal is still ongoing because the conversations are hard. You know, it's a company, it's a multi-stakeholder company, but it was comprised of a legal intervention where nature is given rights on the decisions of the board, a mythical component because this tiny forest is protected by a mythological aspect, which works like this. If you enter this forest, you will be cursed. Just this. Then, a physical art piece of a forest where no one can go, a non-intervention site inside their own reforestation. And the powerful move here is to have this tiny piece of land inside the board of directors of this company with a voice. It is kind of complex to have these conversations in this context, but this is, in our belief, this is how the conversation should go, to have the voices of the non-humans cast on the most powerful decision-making processes. So all the people we had the fantastic opportunity to work with Laure Provost, who is a wide-known artist, and the team is here. Here is Rita, myself, and Guillermo, and it is an ongoing process. But then, how can we represent the more than humans into the decision-making process? How can we do this? And we developed a very first case where we asked 50-something people to define a new site for a new university campus near the local ecosystem, the local water body in Lisboa. Then, half of these were confronted by the same response given by an anthropocentric AI agent, and the other half confronted by the same answer given by a biocentric AI agent. And we saw, and we asked them if they would change their decision of the site after the response of those AI agents, and we also asked them to self-report the emotions they felt while they were confronted. And people did not like. People found the anthropocentric agent more expert on the ecosystem. Yeah, they could trust both in the same ways, more or less, and the anthropocentric was more human-like, of course. Then, almost none of them would change their decision. Either those who were confronted with the anthropocentric AI agent, neither those who were confronted with the biocentric agent. Which is amazing. It is amazing. Yeah, so more information. We all know this does not lead to better decisions. We all know this. But with the massification with AI use, it is complicated because it's confirmation bias and aversion bias. People self-reported guilt, regret, and disappointment when interacting with the biocentric agent. Aversion bias. I don't like what I don't like. It's complicated. Even if they know more than me, I don't care. I won't change my decision. And the confirmation bias, that they are doing and thinking the same way I do, they are cool. Confirmation bias. And for us, this is quite complicated in this era of massification of AI because we have to be very careful when design AI mediations to be able to confront also the personal beliefs, the personal identities, and I'll leave you with one further question. In a world full of tensions, political tensions, social tensions, biological tensions, what could be the mediation mechanisms to surpass these biases? Because we don't know. Thank you all. Thank all of these partners. It is an amazing opportunity. But to perform interdisciplinarity, it means talking with a lot of people. And it's nice. It's nice. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And, well, we have a question.
Thank you so much, Cristiano, for such an interesting presentation. One reading that I get out of this is that to change your opinions, your beliefs, really you need something beyond, again, this rational exposition or rational thinking. You need this experiencing. That I wonder what would have been the answer of these same people after they experience nature and experience them on a repeated way, so that they get to love this experience, they get to love these surroundings. Probably they could change their experience in the same, perhaps in a different way, that our experiencing this morning of these activities and these days, they mean something to us much beyond that, or additional to these talks. No? I wonder.
Yeah, and we all know the case of Tidal Arts, which is this European funded project from mission WeOcean, who is centered on the artistic performance to engage local communities for ocean awareness. We all know that science is not enough, and the disbelief in science is rising. Something has to be done quite fast, and one of the most interesting hypotheses is contemplation, is experience, is practice-based. And for that, we have to invite the artists to our hubs and to work together to create novel platforms for people understand what is happening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joseph.
We start here and then continue further. Yes? Try to because if not, we will.
No? Just about more than human. What do you exactly mean? There's non-human and there's more than
Yes.
human. You can explain that
Yeah.
term, please.
Yeah. In my research, I'm defining more than human as biological beings, the built environment, all the social dynamics, and the cosmologies and beliefs. All these comprise the more than human concept as far as I understand. So we can choose one of these components to work on, or we can work on them all, which is a bit tricky.
Not so far from that point.
Yeah, sure.
Hi, and thank you for your presentation. You touched many topics. I have many questions, but I will focus. Well, one thing that puzzles me is your examples were set mainly on North countries, so Europe. I was wondering if this approach you think would be also valid for Global South. I work in West Indian Oceans, and I have some things that I'm not sure if, but this is open for discussion later. My specific question is in the last example you placed for this IA example, were the people interviewed, the groups, aware that it was an IA vision they were exposed, and were these results then contrasted with the same anthropocentric and biocentric visions provided by human people instead of IA?
It was made online, so they had all the information about what was about to happen. And to develop the biocentric model, we inputted all the most updated biological, geological, and all the data we could have to the biocentric model. And the anthropocentric model was developed using the common ChatGPT tools. But we can talk about this later because it is quite complex. But yes, it was this. Then they knew the justifications. We made our own interpretation. That was the best. Tom.
Thanks, Cristiano. I love that. So have your group thought about, or are other groups thinking about, doing the, instead of having training the LLM and linguistically representing biocentrism and anthropocentrism, having visualizations? So imagine an artistic or a virtual reality or whatever. This is what the campus would look like, the biocentric campus would look like. This is what the anthropocentric campus would look like. Because I'm not a neuro whatever, but I believe it activates different bits of the brains if you engage linguistically or visually. It'd be interesting to see if that affected the outcome.
Yes, and it has to be done. It has to be done. Other types of input, rather only the verbose, like visual, colors, music, and so on, of course. Thank you.
So we continue. Thank you. Later we will have opportunity to talk more about this. And now we have a Nuno Jardim Nunes from Universidade de Lisboa as well. He's an engineer leading a research unit at the intersection between design, interaction, and digital technologies. And he's gonna talk about the Bauhaus of the Seas as a vision for the new European Bauhaus.
Okay,
right?
Thank you very much. I didn't know that we were going to talk one after the other. We are actually working on the same project. Cristiano was part of the team. that I set up. I would like to thank you for inviting me. It's been a wonderful, yesterday was a wonderful day. Unfortunately, I have to leave after lunch because I have to be closing another project in Madeira later on. So my name is Nuno Jardim Nunes. I'm a computer scientist, sorry, by training. And I've founded with Valentino, who is also here, the Interactive Technologies Institute of the University of Lisbon, which is a research unit that brings together a lot of different backgrounds. So we have people from computer science, but we also have people from design, art, history, I don't know, you name it. Architecture is becoming a big topic. And when a few years ago, when von der Leyen, okay, this was not working? Okay, yeah. So a few years ago, when von der Leyen came up with this idea of a new European Bauhaus after the COVID pandemic, the need to have something that could inspire people to move and to implement the Green Deal, I came to the Portuguese government and said, I think we need to do something about this. This could be a unique opportunity, especially in Portugal, to create something that is new. And for those who don't know what is the new European Bauhaus, it's a new movement that the EU has been using to implement the European Green Deal, which is a policy for sustainability in Europe. And it brings together these three dimensions, you know, the inclusion, the sustainability, and the aesthetic dimension. And a lot of what we've done in the last 20 years, almost 20 years, that since we founded ITI, was very aligned with this idea that you needed to integrate people through participatory design methods. Cristiano was just giving examples of how this was done in the Bauhaus of the Seas. But you also, this involves also multi-stakeholder engagement, which is always very complex because you have people that make decisions. We have people that are affected by those decisions, and we even have more than humans that are heavily affected, as we saw from the talks yesterday. And this requires an interdisciplinary approach, which is very, very hard. The core team of the Bauhaus of the Seas that we were coordinating was myself as a computer scientist. We have a colleague from architecture, a colleague from design. Cristiano is the biologist. We had also a colleague from history and an environmental engineer. When you put all of these people, you know, in a meeting table talking, they have different languages, they have different concepts. It's very, very complicated. And that's something that we've been doing in our research institute proudly. So why the Bauhaus of the Sea? So I was raised, not born, but raised in Madeira Island. This is one of my favorite places in the island. It's called Feijão dos Padres. And when you are born in an island, especially an island where you see the ocean from the high, your relationship with the ocean is very different. This idea, I am also visiting professor at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, and many of my colleagues in Pittsburgh, some of them have never seen the sea. The idea that they cannot go into the ocean for them is very simple. For me, it's just, I cannot even imagine not being in the ocean for at least a week. I get anxious if I don't do that. So when you're coming from a place like this and you look at the new European Bauhaus, we came up with this idea, what if we brought the Bauhaus to the sea? And that was what we did. We actually published the manifesto in the design issues from MIT Press. And the manifesto was a combination. I was coordinating the working group from the Portuguese government, and it included people from the Ministry of Culture and from the Ministry of Science. So it was a very interesting group of people. Some of them were even surfers. I'm a windsurfer myself. And we came up with this idea, what if we brought the Bauhaus to the sea? Wouldn't that be the most important thing that we had to do if we thought about the Green Deal and creating a sustainable world? And so that's how it came about. This is the logo designed by José Albergaria, who, like me, comes from the islands, from the Azores. I know it's very controversial because this can be interpreted as bringing the Bauhaus, bringing industry into the ocean. And I can tell you this is not what we meant by it. And you can see it if you look carefully. There are fish and birds in this very subtle images of fish and birds in this. And the idea is that we should not make to the ocean what we did to land. And that's really the motto of the Bauhaus of the Seas. I'm just giving this because it's a room full of biologists and some people might be offended by the image itself. But if you read the manifesto, you will see that we meant what we wanted to say. So we created the Bauhaus of the Seas as a manifesto. We invited people to contribute, and it was a surprising thing that when the European Commission opened the call for the lighthouse projects, we were one of the of the 6 lighthouse projects funded. We joined forces with Venice, Genova, but we also brought several of other interesting ecosystems, aquatic ecosystems of Europe, you know, the Horizon Strait, the Elbe River in Hamburg, the Delta, which is the most important logistical place in Europe, and Lisbon and Oeiras, as Christian was talking about. I am not going to talk about the Bauhaus of the Seas. I just wanted to raise your awareness because the project closed in December. We are applying for new calls of the NEB. And again, what we are facing with the European Commission, I'm going to Brussels on the 10th of June to discuss this again with the EU, is that we kind of brought the ocean into the movement of the NEB, but then on the subsequent funding calls, nobody understood where to bring, you know, the NEB is not about the ocean. The NEB, we have a mission ocean. And so again, we are faced with these kind of silos in the funding of research in Europe that don't make sense. But if you're interested, there is a series of episodes called Drop, Ripple, Wave, which was part of the idea of the Bauhaus of the Seas, and you can watch them. And each one of the episodes is about a particular drop that we've developed in the Bauhaus of the Seas. And so if you're interested, also the website contains a lot of information. So what I'm going to talk about today is some of the research that we did in parallel with the Bauhaus of the Seas project, which again was very much focused on all of these 6 cities and the co-design process that was applied across those cities and the challenges that these cities face. And again, bear with me, I'm focused on the ocean, but I think that the only way that we can take care of the ocean is we take care of the people that live near the ocean. They need to care, and everybody needs to care about that. Otherwise, we will not be able to protect our ocean. So that is my pragmatic engineering approach to the problem. And I know that you're doing amazing work in research, but I think this is where we need to actually put the effort. Is we need to work with the communities. We need to make sure that these communities can protect our ocean. And because I'm a computer scientist, I wanted to bring the digital component into it. You saw part of the research we did with AI. I'm not going to talk about that because I knew Cristiano was going to give a highlight about how you can use AI as a good force to help solve this problem. So 3 things I wanted to give you examples of the research we are doing, mostly from my PhD students and postdocs. One is human exceptionalism. We saw yesterday lots of talks about this. The fact that the non-human entities are reduced to passive resources, and nature is treated as a resource. And we saw this from deep sea mining to many other examples from fishing. I was very interested by the talks yesterday. The second one is most of the methods we have to deal with these problems, they are terrestrial biased. So they were developed not to work with the ocean, not to work in the intertidal zones. They were developed to work in urban environments. You know, the idea of a smart city and a lot of this technological push that is bringing, you know, technology from the urban environment into the ocean. And the third one is that the digital systems that we've built are mostly anthropocentric. And this is something that needs to be changed. You know, what Cristiano was just showing about with AI is an obvious example that everybody is talking about. I'm not as scared about AI. Fortunately, I'm a computer scientist. I know how much of the buzz around AI is just a buzz. But I am worried about these visions of a future that is very anthropocentric and is scaling with digital technology. So we can do something about that. And I see a lot of the communities like moving away from AI because they say it consumes a lot of resources and we should not be doing that. But this is not the way you can affect change in the future. You need to work with AI, and we need people like you to work with AI, because most of the energy that is wasted with these systems is wasted in training the systems, is not during inference. It's not when you're running actually the queries. This can be done now with a computer or a phone without a very minimal impact. So let me give you a few examples of how we can shift this perspective. This is the work of André Tavares, who was a friend of the Bauhaus of the Seas in ERC, called Fishing Architecture. I'm not sure if anyone is aware of his work. It's an amazing work. So he is actually studying how fish produce architecture. And this is an image of a factory in Matosinhos in the north of the country. And this factory is built according to the measures and the impact of the fishing stock that you have available. So the size of the factory matches the size of the apparatus that is used to actually capture the fish. Most of our coastal cities in Portugal and elsewhere in the world, because they were built for fishing, they are actually designed to mimic the activities of people fishing. And so if you look at the codefish architecture, you look at the sardine architecture, it's an amazing example of how these things are done. The second one is an example from Rio Formosa. Everywhere I go to give this talk, I always take a photo from Google Maps of the most biodiverse place. And unfortunately, when I go to give these talks, I go to nice places that have some kind of biodiverse place. This is what Google Maps says about Rio Formosa. It's worth 0. No restaurants, no roads, no nothing. So for them, the Rio Formosa doesn't exist. And some of you might say, well, it's good. I say it's not good. Because if it's not there on Google Maps, people are not going to care about it. People are going to think this is just, completely uninteresting. And I think that these maps, these digital expressions of our biodiverse will need to be represented. And I will give you a few examples of how we are we're trying to do that. So again, I'm not going into the details. The approach of the Bauhaus of the Seas was based on this idea of a drop. A drop is something that is based on a co-design process, like Christiana was explaining. It brings a lot of different background people. We call them the Sea Forum. So it's a group of stakeholders that can talk about the particular impact of a particular intervention in one aquatic ecosystem. And we chose several examples of drops, mostly from art and design. And we said, well, these are great ideas. Can we actually try to implement them in concrete territorial communities? So let me give you one example of an idea. I don't know if you heard about cooking sections. It's an amazing architect duo. They created this idea of climavore. The way we eat affects the climate. And the way they do this is they create these installations. This is an oyster farm in Scotland. The oyster farm is a beautiful also design, or at least a beautiful photo of a design infrastructure, which then moves with the water. When the water goes up, the whole infrastructure is underwater. When it goes down, it becomes a place where people talk about what they eat and how what they eat affects the climate. Another example is architecture for fish. This is again from Superflex, is another design studio. And the Super Reef is a kind of urbanism designed for fish. So these are sculptures done for fish. And they are beautiful, and they are designed to attract people and to make people care about the importance of preserving the coastal ecosystems. In Denmark, we were just talking with Paulo that he just visited Aarhus, and the amount of waste from pig farms is incommensurable, and it's destroyed a lot of the ecosystems in. I think, Paulo, you were saying 5% of the water is reasonable. Is acceptable. It's not good. It's acceptable. 5% of the water because of the waste of the pig farms. So we have many drops. So all of these drops were done by us, looking at what people are doing and how we could adapt them and scale them up and understand if the communities will adopt them, what will be the consequences of adopting these things. And I'm going to give you a few examples of that. The goal being that we wanted to ripple. We wanted these drops to ripple, to have a scaling effect and for other communities to adopt them. I'm not going to go through this, but I'm going to give you examples. The first one is multi-species assemblies. So we pushed the idea that each one of these pilots could have a multi-species assembly. And we actually implemented them through something called the ZOOP, which is an organizational model that includes the voice of non-humans. This was done. We actually published a paper about it. But we wanted to push a little bit more. So this is the work of my student, Katerina Iglzaki. She's an architect, and she's actually trying to understand how we can represent, how we can replace the blue Google Maps empty kind of representation with something that is a little bit more interesting. So she did this ethnography in the salinas of the Tagus River, and she's exploring new types of digital maps that represent what's happening in these places. And imagine if instead of opening Google Maps and seeing a blue area in the Rio Formosa, you could actually see something like this, which represents the different types of activities that happen during the day, and different times of the day, different seasons. I'm sure Faro is very different in the winter as opposed to the summer. And what type of activities are there? So in the Tagus River, there is a lot of activities. There is a lot of controversial farming of shellfish, for instance, with migrant communities. And all of this is represented in these beautiful new types of maps that Katerina is working on. Can we make these maps, again, translate into new models of organization? Can we make the University of Algarve in the board of the University of Algarve have a representative of the non-humans, of the Rio Formosa, for instance? Would it make a difference if the rector of the university that we heard talking yesterday, every time she makes a decision about what to do with the University of Algarve, there was a representative from Rio Formosa saying, you should do that, you shouldn't do that? How would this change the way people make decisions? And so this is part of the work we have been doing. Actually, there was a question about whether we have been exploring with different ways of representing AI biocentric agents. This is the work of another PhD student, Joana Pestana. She developed this installation. It's like a 4-meter high installation where you can actually read the dialogue of non-humans about a particular ecosystem. The curtains there try to represent an ecosystem. And what you see is this conversation between bacteria, people, animals, and then, the goal here is to make people reflect about what could happen if the different types of animals were talking to each other. She started with having people talking on behalf of the non-humans, and now she's using AI to try and experiment and see if the results are the same. And we actually tried to do this at scale. So I was invited by my colleague who designed the participatory platform for the location of the new airport of Lisbon. We had 150,000 people giving their opinions about this huge mega infrastructure that in Portugal is taking more than 30 years to decide where to do. We are very efficient at making decisions in Portugal. And I said, yeah, I'm willing to help. I'm very interested in this case study, and I want to create a platform that avoids polarization, this kind of discussions. And actually, the second best location for the airport of Lisbon came from a group, an environmentalist group that used the platform to propose this location, and the committee actually analyzed it and considered it was an interesting one. If you see this, the way people put their opinion is designed in a way that avoids polarization. So every time you say, I'm against or for something, you actually are confronted with the opinions of other people. And this is something we've been doing with renewable energies. Yesterday was the result of the renewable energy effort. Sorry, I'm not going to talk about the food. The other one is Blue Maker Spaces. So we are working with, again, architects and designers to understand how they could use the existing materials from the ecosystem and reinventing them. So this is one of my favorite examples. They looked at oyster shells and pigments from the Tagus River estuary, and they recreated tiles, which is probably, some of you know, is one of the most important construction materials done in Portugal. It has a huge tradition. And so the idea that you could design tiles, and this is the work of another student actually from Valentina, Fernanda, who is actually trying to understand how you could use algae to design interactive toys, and working with children. And using these materials to create toys for children. And through that process, they teach kids how these materials are coming from renewable biological materials from the ecosystem. And finally, ocean literacy is another important one. After seeing the talks yesterday, I put up some slides because I was very interested in understanding how we can change the way we look at communication of climate change. This was a former PhD student. She's already graduated. She actually did an analysis of how we were communicating climate change problems throughout the last 10 years. And you can see here that most of the, I don't know how this works, but So most of the solutions are negative or neutral. Very few solutions are positive. And that, if you look back at 10 years of research in communication of climate change, you can see that that's one of the problems. We are not providing actionable positive solutions for climate change. And I'm going to give you one example of her research. This is already some years ago. And this research was inspired by an International Monetary Fund study that said that if we could recover the population of whales to pre-whaling, we could have an impact that is estimated to be 7 times the impact of the Amazon forest, because these are, planetary ecosystem engineers, and they could have a huge impact. So we took that example and we decided, can we use this as a positive solution, and can we communicate this to people? And this is the story of Balthazar the whale.
This is the story of
Marta
Balthazar,
designed,
the blue whale, and his life in today's oceans.
and basically teaches people how this could be a very important solution for climate change. And we used data humanism, so we designed the communication in a way that it could be actionable, that people could relate to them. So things from calling the whale Balthazar, making the size of the whale connected to the size of the people that were actually interacting with the system. And from that, we concluded a few things that I think are relevant for at least some of you. The first one is that we do need to include non-human perspectives to develop a systemic understanding of climate change. It's very, I really don't care if they are anthropocentric or not. I actually think they need to be anthropocentric because otherwise people don't care. We anthropomorphize things because we want to care about things. So I think that's, again, a mismatch. And then we need a cultural shift from concepts of persuasion, personhood, and property to common goods. And finally, to develop hopeful visions of the future. Otherwise, you're basically telling a whole generation you're going to die from climate change. Why should they care? They will only rebel. And so the work on this area has been evolving. I'm going to skip this one. This is a toolkit that is going to be published in Singapore next month from Valentina De Marchi, another PhD student, where she's developing this participatory toolkit to work with kids. And I'm running out of time. I will skip a few examples here. But I wanted to talk, because I think that's also why Paulo invited me, about the work that we've been doing with virtual reality and underwater. This has been published recently. It's from another PhD student, Beatrice Magui Pinto. She developed a VR representation of a deep dive. So you put a VR headset and you go diving, okay? And we tried to experiment with several things. One of them is, how do you guide people to dive in VR? So she came up with this idea of having animals as companions. So you meet this whale, this monk seal, and the monk seal starts looking at you, and then you follow the monk seal. And then as you keep diving, you find a whale, and you have to help the whale. And then you keep diving, and then you find a coral, and then you have the ending of the game done by that. We used this as a probe, and we used it to understand if, for instance, the movement in VR would help you dive. And we know that, for those who are divers, we know that that's not the way you dive. But we had to find a way for normal people to understand what is the diving experience. But more importantly, we wanted to understand how people felt when they were immersed in this deep dive experience in VR. And we had surprising results. It feels like new life. I don't want to live. There were people that said, and this was clearly demonstrated in the last paper we published, that their connectedness with the ocean increased significantly after experiencing just this 20-minute deep dive. We also understood that physical exertion had a huge impact, so we are actually now trying with haptics, with vests that put pressure, that simulate the underwater pressure. And we even had people saying that their ears had popped, although they were just standing, like us. So that's a very important research track that we are following. If you're interested, please do I have to leave after lunch, but I will be around, and please do email me. And animal companionship was also a very important element of the experience. Without the animals, people were just lost. They didn't know what to do. And again, we were not saying to people that it's okay to approach a wild animal. That was not the purpose. This is an immersive experience. So we can play around with things that, of course, we should not do in real life. And like I said, you can find more about the project. There are episodes about each one of these. I just scratched the surface. We also have a statement about what the Bauhaus of the Sea is here, answering the question that I heard previously, the global south. We don't want this to be a Eurocentric perspective. We are actually much more open to learn from the global south about how they treat nature, for them nature is very different than from us. And so we actually published a paper exactly about that. And I conclude just thanking everybody. This is the work of a lot of people, including Cristiano and Valentina that are here, but many of the amazing PhD students that have been attracted by this idea of a Bauhaus of the Seas, and that I hope will continue forward. Thank you.
Amazing talk. Before we pass to the questions, I ask not to leave because I'll give important information about this afternoon activities. And in this break, we will have the group picture. So please stay around. It will go immediately before the break. Now I pass to Sylvia, and we can have one or two questions.
Well, I have a question.
Hello. Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm Raquel, I'm an anthropologist. I just want to share with you because I'm doing ethnographic work on Coulatra, and I'm starting to work on a UMap on Coulatra Island, precisely an interactive map. I am a part of Humanities European Research Area project called Liminal Waterways Countercultures, and one of the goals of this project is a humanities project on water, is precisely to build a UMap. So I just wanted to share that someone is working on that and trying to tackle that issue on how it is only green and blue. And thank you very much for your presentation. Thank
you. I didn't have time to show this one, but this is the Atlas of the Tagus River developed by Katerina, my student. Yeah, and this is a digital platform that is available for anyone to use. It's still, unfortunately, not completely able to deploy without some intervention.
But it's online.
It's online. It's called the Tagus Atlas of the Tagus, and if you want, we will be more than happy to share with you the platform so you can do it for Coulatra. It will be amazing if this happens.
Thank you for your talk. I have a question for both previous presenter and you. I would like to recall this notion of anthropomorphizing the non-human and the animals and the modern human. So how can we ensure that our AI-assisted tools are speaking in behalf of those animals? Just an expression that you used that made me think a lot about the, all the, the problematization of speaking in behalf of somebody which in the first place does not have decision-making capabilities as we do, and so on and so forth. So have you considered these aspects within the problem, which are both cognitive, anthropological, philosophical? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. This is a very interesting and important question. Again, I'm not a biologist or an ecologist. I don't intend to have any authority in what's doing. What we are working with biologists, but what we are trying to do is to say someone needs to work on this. It's super important. People are going to be using this. They are already using these chats every day. If you don't have people working on making sure that these chats could inhabit perspectives on non-humans, you're going to increase the pressure on having a very anthropomorphized or anthropocentric perspective of the planet. So I think this is a very, very important topic to work on. Said that, the initial experiments that we are doing are very bad. So this idea, I mean, you can create a prompt and say to ChatGPT, you are a whale, talk as if you were a whale, if you can experiment this. And he actually talks like if it's like a whale. But if you try to go to a specific species, let's say from the Rio Formosa or from Madeira, we are doing this in Madeira with the local museum, where we are using local species. The information that the general purpose models have about this specific local species is almost zero. So they will talk like in a way that is reasonable, but if it's a biologist, after 3 prompts, he already knows that this doesn't make any sense. So in Madeira, we have a monk seal, which is called the Mediterranean monk seal. So the model thinks it's a Mediterranean monk seal. It used to be in all Mediterranean Sea, but now it only exists in Madeira and Mauritania. And so he starts talking as if the monk seal was in Genova. It's not. This is a historical perspective of the species that existed. So I think this is very important work that needs to be done, and only people that know about that can do it. How are we doing it, by the way? We are basically asking biologists and ecologists to give us specific documents that describe that species and that ecosystem, and we feed that into the model to make sure that the model is tuned to that specific species. And the results are much better.
Thank you, Nuno. Really amazing presentation. I'm very old-fashioned, no? You know, and when I look at these things, I get amazed, but I also get worried, no? Because in a way you are trying to present people. When, for example, yesterday when we arrived, or the day before yesterday, we arrived in the plane, and people was not watching at the windows, looking at the beauty of these marshes, and then we were there, and people were looking at the mobiles and checking where they were. So it's like turning reality into a flashing information, very nice flashing information, that not only loses the sense and the experiencing of reality, but also loses the ways beyond rational and information and all sorts of sensorial cognitive relations with nature. You are losing those. I mean, you are flashed. You are flashed by this immersive application, and you say, "Wow, I really am part of the ocean." But that, I'm sure that after a few days, that's gone. That's gone because it's not real experiencing. This is just a flash. It's like you look at a girl and their eyes are beautiful. You think, wow, this is a flash. No, I'm in love with this girl. No, but after a couple of days, you've forgotten about those eyes. No, because it's the way you experience this relation, and much beyond your physical and intellectual reality. There's much more there. I'm always, because I'm very old-fashioned and I recognize the value of this, but I'm always afraid that you are losing so many things when you move into this direction. No, I don't know. That's just maybe that's more for the debate, but
just a comment. I mean, I didn't show, but we are actually trying to do work in that. Actually, this is work from Valentina, not from me. But what, for instance, in another project on people trekking in nature, what we designed was not a phone app, because we don't want people to go into nature walking and then looking at the phone or putting in a VR headset. That doesn't make any sense. What we need to do is use digital technology to enhance the experience. So we have a project called Critter Connect from another student, where she developed an armband. So instead of walking with the phone, you walk with an armband. And this armband actually gives the calls of the species that you might encounter during the walk. And so you're walking, and suddenly the armband starts pressing your arm, and then stands, and then you're like, what? Oh, I entered the contact zone of this species. So we are experimenting with new ways of making people actually more attuned to nature. But I have to say that, we have problems with young kids now that cannot even run anymore. They cannot run. This is as serious as that. And so we need to understand that we are working also with a generation that is looking at the phones all of the time, and we need to find ways to use that as a way to bring them back to nature. Otherwise,
I'll make it a quick question. I love all the examples, and I wondered if you knew about, as we heard, there are lots of initiatives like this bubbling up all over the place. Is there any organisation or effort to network this stuff together and provide perhaps a common place where anyone who's interested in this kind of transformative change can see all the examples of what's being experimented with? So my working title for this is Gaiapedia. So it's a bit like a Wikipedia space, but people like your great group, the stuff we heard about over here, everybody's populating what they're learning by doing with these kind of initiatives to help people regenerate nature, connect with nature in different ways. Is anybody already doing that? Because it seems like that would help facilitate social learning, collective learning, basically, because we learn from each other's mistakes and successes.
yeah, I think it's a great idea. We actually wanted the Bauhaus of the Seas website to be like a catalog of these kinds of interventions, but of course it's very limited to what we did in the project and the people that, other projects like Tidal Arts. I think this is very important because what's happening right now, I don't know if you are aware of that, but Grok, the model from Elon Musk is creating a Grokopedia. Yeah, so this is real. It's a AI-generated Wikipedia version, because of course they are against Wikipedia, against the commons, and they are generating whole encyclopedias using AI, and this is terrible because this means that you could have a certain vision of the world populating what you consider to be a reference. So I think that's a project I will be willing to contribute to, a Gaiopedia, not a Grokopedia.
Thank you so much. Yes. Oh, yes. Thank you so much. Amazing talk, amazing work. So I just interrupt now. We are good on timing, but I need some extra timing for logistics. In the meanwhile, I call here where is Judith and April. I'll need you. I will need Teresa Borges that want to say some words. You can come here. And I engage before they leave Isabella or Susanna. Can you take the group picture, please? I'm engaging students. So, no, not now, outside. So now I can explain everything. I have the people that I need. So, thank you so much. We are going very well, I think. So, first information. Now, before we go to the coffee break, resist to the temptation to go to the food and so on. We go outside. We turn to the left. We go next to the library and we take the group picture. Then, the next thing is that these are my slides from the beginning. I will recall the part of the afternoon sessions. Is there people here that were in group 3? Please raise your hand. In that were not selected to go in the full guided walk. Not a lot of people. Are you interested in joining one of the groups G1 or G2? We can offer places in G1 or G2. But we are not sure if there is place in the small bus of the university that is 27 seat. So please contact the registration at this break that you could go in the group, but maybe you need to reach the campus on time in another type of transportation, but they can deal with that, please. So going to that. Thank you. So I confirm the timing. Let me put group 1. So when we finish, we are good on time, so we will have the second session this morning, and I'll be the chair, so I'll try to keep the timing so that we finish at 12:30. And then for group 1, as I informed some of the people, it's the only group that have lunch boxes because we need to hurry and go, and it's mostly the invited speakers and artists. And don't go to the canteen or anything. They will be offered here the lunch boxes directly at the reception, and then we go directly to the bus stop. And this for everybody that needs to take these buses from the university. The bus stop is next to the main parking. So imagine when you enter in the main gate, it's just totally in front, next to the cantina. It's very easy. Okay. So for the first group is the one that need to rush a little bit, but you receive the lunch boxes, and we go to the Gambelas. Let me check, 12:45, it's good. We take this bus and we aim to try to start the full guided walk at 1:30. It's not so much rush. We have time, but it's for us to be organized. Then second group, it's the same, but with a bit more time. So the bus is at 1:30, and limited seats, it's 27 seats. But in principle, we are more or less tight. But if you can, it's the best. And if you can pass in the reception, the people not need to go in one of these buses, we have a sheet, and you will sign up, and we will be sure that we have enough seats. And then we start the walk at 2. At 2, and it takes 2 hours, 2 hours and a half. Then, this is I explained already, we will be gathering for the people that go by car. All the localizations are in the venue tab of the program, and the people that are from here know, or the other ones, when they reach the Gambelas campus, it's next to the library. So the library of Gambelas will be on this side, and it's this building where you have the seahorse sculpture. Then this will be the path. And in principle, we would no longer have this group only doing this part, because now we can offer some places for group 3. Anyway, if somebody don't have the time or energy to go in the walking part, but want to leave the car before the bridge of Praia de Faro and experience that audio meditation and so on, you are welcome. I want to ask group 3, I can say from here. So there is a bus that was predicted for group 3 if needed, that is at 2:45, that maybe it's no need. So there, we will have a sheet in the registration. If nobody needs this bus, we don't need to come back with the bus of the university, okay? So it will be by registration, because it will be for group 3, but now we are joining group 1 and group 2, which is amazing. And I remind all these scares, drinking water and snacks, headphones if you have it, because you will need to have this audio, sunglasses, cap, sunscreen, comfortable shoes. Please take a pencil if you can. It's for both things. If you want to draw with the urban sketchers, they will be arriving around, I think, 4:30. I'll tell in a minute. And they have some material. We have some extra material. But also the poets will raise a challenge of reflection during the walk. So they advise us to take a pencil, and they will provide the cards. I don't know if I'm giving too much details. That is the poet. You can stand so that we know you will be joining us near the seahorse at the beginning of the groups. Anyway, so, and for the ones that don't go to walk, that I think it's a few, you can go park before the bridge of the Praia de Faro, and you have the localizations in the venue page, next to the crab roundabout. And this is the important part, is that we will have this audio, so it will be connected to the mobile, but not too much. Mm-hmm. There is this QR code. Please try out if it's working well. It was working well before, but some people have said. And anyway, we'll have printouts of it. And the equipa from Collective La Última Merda, Judith and Abril, will be there to give instructions and to provide the QR codes. It's everything working? You can access. So it's a drive with the audio that you can start at the beginning of the bridge to Praia de Faro, and we'll take you. It's about 28 minutes, but maybe you make it faster, you enjoy and use it as you like. I don't know if you want to say some words. I think in general, do I have more logistics apart from that? No, so I will leave to you and you. And next, I will talk with Teresa Borges, that is the curator of the Ocean Art exhibition. I don't know if somebody visited or not yet. We have a sample of the Ocean Art exhibition next to the library. And it's very convenient. Now we do the group picture in that direction, and everybody will know where it is. So I pass the word to you, and then to...
Yeah, hello. Really quick, just that this audio immersion in Faro, it's made by Art Points Collective, and it's like a piece of art. So to make it poetic, let's say, the best thing is that you take advantage of the Wi-Fi now and download it. There is a QR code outside where the food is, so you can download it now, then forget about it until you see us later on, and when you finish, delete it. So it's just like this ephemeral experience, okay? Thank you.
And finally, a few words from Teresa about the exhibition. You come here, as you prefer.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Teresa Borges. I just wanted to remind you of the sample of this exhibition, Ocean Art, Science to Art. It's a very, in fact, it was the first one, the first edition was last year, and is the work of artists and scientists. So they worked to get together. First, we had a talk to the artists about the problems of the ocean, and they had 6 months working, and of course, unfortunately, the space is not enough because the result of this was more than 40 artworks, but there is kind of 12, 13 only, because that's the space. Anyway, it was the 13 artists. They worked together with several scientists. There was also some pictures of research projects. So any art work was also with scientific information. Also, the thing in the beginning was exactly the artists and the scientists. These two worlds, these two types of people are always thought to be completely different, opposite, left side of the brain, right side of the brain. But in fact, they are very similar. They have similar ways of working, the similar problems, and that was exactly what happened during the time of this exhibition. So I agree with you, by the way, about old-fashioned. I'm very old-fashioned. And the exhibition is one way of transmit results, problems, and solutions. So please don't forget to visit this sample. It's a small sample, but we try to present as much as possible the idea of the exhibition.
And it's a sample, but it came and it was assembled on purpose for WeOcean. So thank you so much.
Yes, it was for the WeOcean.
I think there are little booklets. How many?
There's very little booklets left.
But somebody that is very, very interested can request at the reception.
Yes.
Any question? And in the meanwhile, we can slowly walk to the group picture. Yes.
When we have the time to go? When do we have the time to go?
It's there. It's just when you take picture, you just go. It's very small, so it doesn't take much time.
It's open all the time.
Any questions
the schedule
you have, you can try. You can ask me. I mean, any questions.
Thank you.
Okay?
At any time you can visit. And today the schedule is more tight, but maybe tomorrow you have the time. Thank you so much. And good pause for the ones that are at home and streaming. Thank you. So we can start. Marco, we are ready? Okay. And Francisco, we are ready for the presentation? Hello again. For the ones that are online, we are putting the people inside the auditorium so that today we don't get late, so that we have the guided walk and so on here for those that are attending here. And it's my pleasure to present Pablo Lima Arandes from the Universidade de Sevilla. It's working. Yes, yes, it's too much noise. People, please, we are starting. Please join and please with no sound because we are starting. Thank you so much. So it's my pleasure to present Pablo Lima Hernandez, that comes from the Universidade de Sevilla, and that works at the level of Mediterranean to global scales and related to history of cross-scalar reasoning in ocean sciences. And you can come. Thank you, Pablo.
Is this working? Yeah, it is, indeed.
They told me that sometimes we need to put a bit more in front.
All right. 'Cause I'm not a very tall person, so I'd rather have it close to me.
Okay, try out now and then.
Hello, hello. Good.
Now, isn't it? Okay.
Perfect. Okay. So, thank you everyone for being here. Thank you to the organization of this amazing workshop for inviting me to present my research. So what I'm going to talk about, it's bits of my PhD research that I'm carrying out within the DeepMed project based at the University of Seville. It's an ERC project. Sorry. I'm just trying to figure out how to move. There we go. So this is an ERC project based at the University of Seville. It's a project on a history of science and marine science and technology in the Mediterranean Sea over the past 2 centuries. And that's the project in which I'm conducting my PhD. I'm focusing, sorry, why did it go back? Oh, fuck. I'm new to this, right? I don't have to. I clearly am. All right. So, within this project that's tracing a history of oceanography and marine technology over the past 2 centuries, I'm focusing mostly on the second half of the 20th century, especially in the decades that span from the 1970s to the 1990s, arguably the decades in which international environmental governance agencies gained traction internationally and globally. So the question that I'm posing myself, or one of the broadest questions of my dissertation, is how have we come to perceive the Mediterranean Sea as a model basin for ocean sciences and governance throughout the last third of the 20th century? I will further explain what I mean by model basin from an historical and philosophical point of view, but this idea of the Mediterranean being somewhat special or insightful for oceanographic studies is not new to many of the people here. Second question is relating directly to the literature on the history and the philosophy of the earth sciences, and it's about the role that regional scales and regional actors have played in the construction of holistic and globalized knowledge of the earth system. Because the literature so far has focused on tracing global histories of earth sciences, and also practitioners themselves have tended to allocate resources to global scale programs, whereas the role of the local and the regional has been somewhat dismissed, right? And then later question, how have the relations between science diplomacy, environmental governance, and other geopolitical dynamics marked the development of international oceanography programs in the Mediterranean basin? Because the Mediterranean cannot be taken as a self-evident category in itself, neither from a philosophical nor from a historical point of view, because it's basically made up of dozens of countries, institutions, actors that conduct research there. So the choice of case studies has been mainly international oceanography programs in which one can trace how the geopolitical dynamics of the region have played out in the actual carrying of the science, right? Carrying out of the science. So, why the Mediterranean? I've already introduced the idea, but it's convenient to be a bit more precise. First of all, for fundamental oceanographic research, the Mediterranean has been a natural model in which to investigate oceanographic processes, and I will give some examples of that, meaning that studies conducted in the Mediterranean at a smaller spatiotemporal range provided successful in order to understand general circulation patterns, right? And so it's this idea that the Mediterranean can work as a natural laboratory. But where's the origin? How can we trace the origin historically of this idea? Second idea, if we move from the realm of pure or basic fundamental research to the to ocean technologies, then as well, the Mediterranean has become a test basin to probe ocean technologies, right? This idea that we can calibrate, validate our technologies in a shallow or shallower seas, and then escalate them to global scales. And the third, if we move from ocean science and technology to governance itself, then as well the Mediterranean has historically become a model example or a role example of international coordination in environmental science. But then let's try to trace a bit more these questions historically. Sorry. I will just give some scattered examples. I have no time to, of course, go through all the history here. But one of the main and most renowned programs in the international oceanographic research in the Mediterranean was the MEDOC program, which back in 1970 produced the very first, let's say, models of ocean convection before before convection could be observed elsewhere, meaning elsewhere the North Atlantic, the poles, and so on. So then this knowledge produced by studying Mediterranean convection could be somewhat escalated and moved towards other basins of the world ocean. But this did not just affect physical oceanography, but also sedimentary processes, marine geology, also entertained this idea of the Mediterranean being a natural model to study certain processes. Then if we move to the 90s, in which the effects of climate change were already being speculated to affect regional basins, we started to see how some of the very early measurements of deep water warming, due to, that was the hypothesis, to global warming, were conducted in the Mediterranean Sea. And then from there, and already throughout the 21st century, the references to the Mediterranean being a model, Mare Nostrum, natural laboratory, miniature ocean, have become widespread and I guess known to many of the people in the room. More effects here. This is precisely from marine ecology, so pervasive across earth sciences. Also, why do I say it's been a test basin to probe marine technologies? Well, these are reports of the first oceanographic satellites. By oceanographic, I mean that were systematically designed and used to obtain altimetric measurements of the sea. They had been trials before, but it was not until the 1990s that we had the first generations of global oceanographic satellites. Most important of them were the TOPEX Poseidon, designed by NASA and the French Space Agency, and also the ERS-1 mission by the European Space Agency. Both of them, their calibration campaigns for the data, the in-situ field where to calibrate the satellite data, were conducted in the Mediterranean, right? So this notion of the Mediterranean being such a place in the world in which you can test certain technologies, calibrate the data, validate, and so on, and later on, use these prototypes at a global scale. Then we turn to science governance. This is a picture from last year, One Ocean Science Conference in Nice, in which there was a roundtable and discussion around the 50 years of the UNEP MAP, the United Nations Environmental Programme Mediterranean Action Plan Against Marine Pollution, which was signed back in Barcelona in 1975. And curiously enough, this program, before it was sort of designed for the Mediterranean area, which was a highly tensioned area, both geopolitically and techno-scientifically back then, and still today, then it was turned out to be successful enough that this model of science governance, of governing science while caring about the environment, was escalated, or at least there were attempts to escalate this role model of governance to other regional seas, like the Caribbean, the Japan Sea, and so on and so forth. So again, this idea of the Mediterranean as a model pervasive across many disciplines. So then how can we, because this is a very intuitive notion of how we do consider the Mediterranean as a model, but then if we try to sort of frame this in more historical and philosophical terms, how can we do that? Does it even make sense to claim that to make a philosophical claim for that, or a philosophical argument to claim that the Mediterranean has acted as a model? Well, just brief flashes of the literature that are going to come useful for my argument here today. first of all, what historians and philosophers of earth sciences have studied thoroughly is both the experimental side of these sciences, so the deployment of a global observing and monitoring infrastructure of environmental variability. How have we come to deploy this infrastructure globally from the Second World War to today? How is it maintained? What epistemic challenges do we have to face in order to maintain this infrastructure? All the epistemic issues related to data processing, data analysis, and so on and so forth. Secondly, there's another strand of literature focused basically on computer simulations, which are, let's say, the theoretical branch of these disciplines since the post-Second World War period. And as you know, the linear trajectory of these disciplines had tended to articulate more complex models of atmosphere and ocean circulation, the AOGCMs, and also later on, starting in the 90s, Earth system models. So there's these two, let's say, strands of literature focusing on the experimental and on the theoretical side of these sciences, right? I'm not going to enter in detail on all the epistemic problems here, obviously, but then also we have to take into account that this experimental and theoretical side, which are mostly epistemological, come also with an ontological paradigm, which is the conception of the Earth as a complex system, right? Which basically can be synthesized in this idea that Earth and complex system sciences have evolved in parallel, right? Through complex interactions whereby we've come to basically perceive the Earth as such. So then, well, visually, this is the history of how have we come basically to represent the Earth through lemon-shaped kind of models that nonetheless got Suguro Manabe a Nobel Prize in 2021 in physics for his advancements to climate science, to the more conventional kind of models, gridded representations of the Earth, and so on and so forth, right? So this is a story that philosophers and historians of science focusing on epistemology and on the reconstruction of the actors have tried to recount to the public. This is just another more modern Earth system model in which instead of just land, sea, and atmosphere, we account for tons of processes, forces, and so on and so forth. We know that many of the people here, but just tracing this historically is what basically these disciplines have been doing. But then, again, this literature has been primarily focused on climate sciences, which has been, of course, the epitome and then the main example to represent how basically earth sciences have evolved throughout the 20th century. But of course, we know here that the atmosphere and the ocean are highly coupled together. So that means that not only conceptually, a history of climate sciences needs also to be a history of oceanography, but also that we have to focus not just on the oceans and understand them historically as how scientists have basically strive to integrate them into climate models. No, there's a history of oceanography alone that was never necessarily concerned about the atmosphere or not primarily concerned about the atmosphere. Who were the scientists? What were they trying to do apart from, trying to fit climate models? There was, let's say, marine science concerned with the science itself and also lots of environmental concerns surrounding it. So this is the other problem we have to address. And if we regionalize this problem about the history of oceanography, and we focus instead of the whole Earth system in certain subsystems, certain subdisciplines like oceanography, and we regionalize our concerns and our research questions, we arrive, of course, to oceanography of the Mediterranean Sea, which is base of my dissertation. Again, instead of, going from here to here, from the late 60s to 21st century, now the question becomes how have we come to represent the Mediterranean Sea in like very static hydrographic terms from the early 1960s to more complex model-based representations. This is not only a history of epistemic representations, it's also a history of the actors, the policy making that was behind these developments, funding this kind of science. And also in this process, how the Mediterranean itself has become, as I said before, a model basin. And why has it become a model basin? So we have here two entangled histories, one regional history of oceanography and a global history of climatology, right? Let's focus for a moment on this idea of the Mediterranean as a model from the point of view of metaphors, which was a concern raised yesterday in one of the presentations, how metaphors drive scientific thinking. And there's a historian of science, of earth sciences, Julia Rispoli, who says that historical visions of the Earth system reflect different moments of global environmental knowledge, including at the political and governmental level, that have allowed these notions to propagate and attain international credibility through specific programs. So again, the rhetorics of treating the Mediterranean as a model, of course, have enabled the institutions that have been ruling Mediterranean research, from UNEP and UNESCO, but also regional bodies like the Mediterranean Science Commission, the CSM, or the European communities, now the European Union, to have allowed these institutions to gain recognition in the global arena of environmental science policy. So yeah, there's metaphors in science that are partly mere rhetoric, and though these sort of regional claims to get global authority, but at the same time, this goes beyond rhetoric, because these kind of metaphors have a cognitive weight. This match between analogy and metaphor that we saw yesterday, right? And it is this match that's utterly interesting here to reflect actually how metaphors can drive model-based reasoning in the earth sciences. So yeah, basically we all know that there's many kinds of models in science. We have computational models, we have mathematical models, we have conceptual, physical models, models of data. Pervasiveness of models in earth sciences and in sciences, in quantitative sciences in general, we all know it's quite widespread nowadays, right? So basically, all these kind of models are usually associated to a certain kind of evidence that kind of processes this the model processes this kind of evidence. So we can say that nowadays we have basically global observing technologies. That would be one of the sources of evidence. The other source of evidence would be past proxy reconstructions, right? The third kind of evidence would be the laboratory scale model, and the fourth would be computer simulation models. So let's say we have 4 sources of evidence. But then this picture of certain kinds of model with certain kinds of evidence-based reasoning are wanting. Why are they wanting? Because they do not really convey this kind of, they do not convey this sense of cross-scalar reasoning that really is what grounds this use of the Mediterranean as a model, basically. So what critical historians and geographers of science have claimed, and increasingly philosophers of science, basically me, have pinpointed this excessively globalizing gaze of these sciences, because we are not really foregrounding how the regional scales have served to basically reason about global patterns, right? So yeah, that's why I claim that from a philosophical point of view, regional subsystems can be treated as natural models for global dynamics. And the Mediterranean Sea, precisely, is one of these cases. And I will give a very brief example about how the thermaline circulation of the Mediterranean has worked precisely as a model to understand certain abrupt changes in the thermaline circulation of the Mediterranean. Maybe some of the oceanographers here are familiar with the example that I'm about to give. But yeah, this is a definition we already, if I ask to the public what a definition of a computer model is, you would probably give me one. If I ask you for a definition of a mathematical model, you would give me a definition, because those notions are quite, widespread. If you were to ask, okay, why would you focus on a specific region of the Earth to study processes there and then attribute them general importance and say we call this a natural model, then how would you define that, okay? I'm not going to enter into much detail in the definition, but you just have it here. What is a natural model? It's an Earth subsystem that exhibits an exemplary, simpler, or more idealized behavior than another similar target system, normally more complex and of greater scale, with respect to an aspect of property they both share. Additionally, well, forget about the A, but the Earth subsystem, the model system is more tractable, manipulable, and or accessible system than B, and is taken as a model system of its kind and a natural model of B. So the knowledge we gather from one of these systems can be extrapolated to the other. This was very abstract, but basically, if I want to study convection, I'm back in the 1970s and I don't have means to get to the Arctic, I study convection in the Mediterranean and then try to sort of use this as a conceptual guidance, right? So it's it's not really that what the evidence we get from the Mediterranean is automatically going to be extrapolated. This is not the point here. The point is about basically conceptual understanding, heuristic guidance of research, right? Mainly in the early stages of research. So yeah, and the example I'm going to briefly give you relating precisely the thermal circulation, here you have an extract of a conference that was held in Venice in 1993, basically in which this climatologist that I told you before that was awarded a Nobel Prize attended this conference, and it was basically an encounter between global climate scientists and Mediterranean oceanographers. And they were discussing basically the possibility that was also, I think, raised yesterday about the weakening of the North Atlantic overturning circulation, the AMOC, right? So at that moment, it was already kind of evident that in the future, due to climate change, changes would possibly occur to the North Atlantic overturning circulation. Weakening, collapse, concepts were arising at that point. So basically, one of the claims made in this conference was the global cell, meaning the world ocean, is known from modeling studies and also from the paleoclimate evidence that was started to be gathered there, and they were basically realizing how changes in the North Atlantic deep water formation were crucial to understand climate history on Earth. So basically, if during this during these shifts of the North Atlantic we move to one state of the world circulation to another, this would be basically one shift from one equilibrium state to the other. I don't want to get very much into the details, but basically what really I want to highlight here is that the question, they literally ask, do multiple equilibria exist for the Mediterranean thermal circulations? So this is just one example of how basically they were treating the Mediterranean as a basin in itself, and then also the world ocean, and then questions to be answered in parallel could be relevant to each other, right? So this is just more concrete examples than the ones that I gave before on how really they were discussions early on how Mediterranean processes and thermal shifts could really inform other kind of global processes. Again, we do not need to overstate this. This is just conceptual guidance. In any means, what happens in the Mediterranean is going to mimic or mirror what happens elsewhere. But we're talking about, early discussions. So yeah, I wasn't going to actually put this map here, but because Giuseppe Pellegrini gave this example of the circulatory system, it came to mind this map that was also being discussed back then. It's a map published in a science dissemination journal in which basically we can, the colors I think are quite telling of the analogy between the blood in the circulatory system, right? But these diagrams were basically popularized to focus on what was going on up here, right, in the North Atlantic, the place in the world where these shifts were supposedly going to occur in the near future. But then what about the Mediterranean? Well, there was a group of scientists back then that did discover not precisely kind of abrupt shift in the thermal circulation as we would expect in the North Atlantic, but these discussions about does this kind of shifts also occur in the Mediterranean? Well, the answer was that yes, there was kind of shift called the Eastern Mediterranean Transient. This is the paper published in Nature about these results. So, these kind of intellectual exchanges between regional scale communities and global science communities have been somewhat ignored in this historiography, and also talking to Mediterranean oceanographers, they've told me, I wish my PhD students knew more about what's been done in the Mediterranean and about the relevance of the Mediterranean basin, right? So yeah, this was the group of scientists involved in this program. And I will give not many historical detail on that, but as I told you, my dissertation is about philosophy, but also about history. So there were this was not trivial, that scientists get together in an international program to basically coordinate their investigations, and the research practitioners here do know that, but this was even more challenging given that, for instance, countries like Greece and Turkey and Cyprus were about to, they were about to enter war, basically. Israel is self-explanatory at this point. And then, for instance, not only within this kind of programs, but within the Mediterranean basin itself, there were tensions. So, for instance, we had a counter-program to this Eastern Mediterranean program, and there was like kind of institutional contestation. Also, beyond the Mediterranean, we had programs at that moment that were sort of being allocated all the funds for research, not all the funds, of course, but great deal of the funds. And so what I'm trying to convey here is that this idea that the Mediterranean can be philosophically grounded and portrayed as a model was not automatically accepted within the community. There were tensions within the project, geopolitical and epistemic. There were tensions within the Mediterranean basin, and there were tensions that, well, that went well beyond the Mediterranean and affected the global structure of international research programs in climate science. So, yeah, despite the unfavorable international scenario, the big science epistemology of oceanography reached a specific regional context and marginal seas marked by geopolitical tensions and techno-scientific gaps. And secondly, the conception of the Mediterranean as a model and as a test basin gained international traction through these kind of programs. Well, I'm gonna skip this, but just to let you know that this idea was not exclusive to physical oceanography. Also in the realm of marine ecology, they were also entertaining with this idea that conducting programs in certain semi-enclosed basins could afford epistemic advantages, basically, exemplarity, tractability, scalability, these properties that I mentioned before about natural models. Precisely this scientist, Jacques Newell, very famous Belgian marine ecologist who was working, among others, with people from the Instituto de Investigaciones Pesqueras in Barcelona, which I know some people here are familiar with, now called Instituto de Ciencias del Mar. Some of the names are Ramón Margalef, Antonio Cruzado, Antonio Ballester. So, of course, these kind of ideas entertained by the Mediterranean science community have also a legacy that lasts until today. Well, I was going to read this quote, but I think that you could already have a close look at it, and I'm going to just close up, but basically stating that this idea that the Mediterranean can be considered as a model, we can ground that philosophically, but also we have to be attentive to the rhetorics, to the historical contingency of how these ideas actually gained international traction. Historians of science tend to focus more on the rhetorics, on the contingency, and philosophers more on epistemology. I think we need both pictures to get a full understanding of how these processes of knowledge production unfold in the long term. Then, secondly, of course, and relating to this conference, our belonging to the ocean is contextual, is regional, is gradual, and it's sensed in a stepwise fashion. It goes without mentioning that all the sciences involved in these programs were Mediterranean, and they had, this idea of the Mediterranean as a unifying category among them, and that was essential for these programs to work. And then thirdly, how do we approach an ocean that's so multi-layered and so multiscalar? Well, basically sorry for that. We rarely perceive and study the ocean as a given self-evident wall, but rather by integrating bits of evidence, of information, of data, models across a scale through novel ways like natural modeling. In this case, that was the example that I presented to you. And then secondly, if you recall this example of the abrupt thermal circulation shifts in the Eastern Mediterranean, I think one of the lessons we can draw from this is that this big picture of the global ocean builds on multiple and interconnected big little pictures that can yield as many surprises as the global ocean. So that's why we have to, or at least I think we have to advocate for a more multi-layered and non-hierarchical ontology. So yeah, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much. Very interesting, and thank you for keeping the timing. That's perfect. Questions? Sylvia.
Yes, well, just a comment. This reminds me of the debate about cultural areas. In anthropology, we had a similar dilemma to establish cultural areas. So it's the same. I mean, in the Mediterranean was one of these cultural areas, and the problem was, can we establish cultural patterns to define a whole Mediterranean in the same way? So the borders, I mean, between one culture and another, are not so easy to establish. So, but because there is always a flux of cultural exchange between cultures. So where to put these borders, or how to define these cultural patterns that standardize a way of understanding an area, a cultural area. Mm-hmm. So it's something that it's curious, it's similar to this philosophical debate as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, boundary categories are always problematic, and even categories that seem to be very bounded, like the Mediterranean, which is a pretty much enclosed sea, can deal problems, and those problems are far from minor. For instance, in the 70s, many American and British oceanographers were concerned about the Mediterranean mainly to study the Strait of Gibraltar. And for them, the Mediterranean was nothing more than an impoverished branch of the Atlantic. We knew pretty much nothing about the Eastern Mediterranean. All the studies conducted in the West, or many of the studies conducted in the Eastern Mediterranean by these foreign countries were mainly directed to understand the influence the Mediterranean has on the Atlantic circulation. So yes, the Mediterranean for them was a subcategory or a marginal sea, which was explicit mention to that. Whereas, on the other hand, you had the nations concerned about Mediterranean, oceanography, especially Italy was one of the countries that was most concerned about developing their oceanographic capabilities in the basin. So yeah, you have a lot of contrasts, just focusing on what country was doing what kind of research. Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks for the nice talk. In the global ocean, one of the most important drives behind the discovery of deep ocean circulation, boundary currents, etc., was the military need to understand the propagation of sound in the thermocline, right? Because you had to detect enemy submarines, hide from them, and communicate underwater. And was this also a drive in Mediterranean oceanography or not at all?
Yeah, absolutely. My supervisor has written on these topics. This was mainly in the 60s, basically. In the 60s, you had the largest concentrations of submarines, of US submarines, in the Eastern Basin ever in history, basically to face the Soviet threat. And yeah, definitely studying acoustics in the Mediterranean was vital for basically the motion of the submarines. There was this, which is still present today, the Sackland Laboratory in La Spezia in northwestern Italy. That was founded by NATO in 1958, precisely because of these results. And you might wonder, why was the US involved in this program that I've talked about in the late 80s? Well, because the co-chair of the program was funded by the US Navy precisely to study mesoscale processes in the Eastern Mediterranean. So yeah, the Navy has always been behind American interests in the Mediterranean, for sure.
And one last one, yes.
Thanks, I really enjoyed that. I was curious because I'm aware that I wondered about basically the history of the Mediterranean's role possibly in thinking about ocean deoxygenation, because there are these well-known sapropels, laminated organic rich shale deposits from relatively recent Quaternary Earth history, but there's also this wider interest in oceanic and oxidant events in deep time. And I wondered, and obviously now we're all concerned about future deoxygenation of the ocean, I wondered if the Mediterranean had been any kind of test model or model system for thinking about oceanic anoxia events, ocean deoxygenation, or whether it's more of a bit part player, because you also saw that in basins like the Baltic Sea.
Thank you. Well, to the question if nowadays the Mediterranean is being considered as a model for deoxygenation, I'm afraid I have no answer to that, because I'm focused mainly on 20th century. But really, actually in the early 70s and even later, one of the only places in the world where you could get these sapropels was the Mediterranean basin. So it was an important source of evidence, yes, for sure. I'm just not an historian of marine geology, but I would like to have an answer to your question.
And the rest has to continue for later. I call Tom Oliver for the next talk. Thank you. So he comes from the University of Reading and works also in governments and is the author of 2 books, Nature Disillusion and Self-Disillusion. And you have your word. Thank you.
Thank you. So, here we go. Hello. So, yes, a slight change of focus. I'm going to talk about the science of our connection to the ocean and what this means for us and also the planetary health. So I'm going to start, whereas we had talked yesterday from Giuseppe Giovanni about a kind of analogy of how the biophysical processes in the ocean relate to the physiology of bodies. I'm going to turn it around today and think about, well, who are Who am I? Who are we? And why that matters. So this question, yeah. Do you want me to stick it here? Okay. Maybe I'll take that, yeah. Yes. Okay. I think I like to wander around. So this question, who am I, has been approached from different philosophical starting points or religions, and I'm going to come at it today initially from a science perspective, and it has relevance for the multiple environmental problems that we face. So if we go back as to, what we thought we were made of, our bodies, for a long time, this is the theory that held sway, that we were made of these four humours, yellow bile, black bile, blood and phlegm. And that it was the balance of these four humours that thought to determine someone's personality. So words like, not common anymore, but someone is phlegmatic, it meant they're very calm and controlled. Or if someone was melancholic, they had too much black bile and they were very depressed and anxious, etc. So, but I like this quote from Sherlock Holmes, and who sat next to his fire talking to his assistant Watson. And he says, "My dear fellow, life is infinitely stranger than anything which the mind of man could invent. We would not dare to conceive the things of which are mere commonplaces of existence." And this is about, the reality of what we are made of. It can be far more amazing than the kind of, far more fantastical than some of the myths. So to explore that, let's just, I want you to fire up your imagination and think of this building. And it's a stormy night, and the rain is lashing against the window panes. And a flash of lightning reveals the form of a hunched figure with a scalpel in hand. And he shuffles across the room and takes up a pen and starts to write. And he says, "The subject was a white male, 46 years of age. Death was due to a skull fracture as a result of a fall. Dissection of the cadaver to obtain the desired organs and tissues for study was performed on a stainless steel table covered with a polyvinyl sheet. Soft tissue samples prepared for analysis by first being diced in a porcelain bowl with stainless steel knives." So this might sound like some kind of gothic horror fiction, but it was actually from a paper by Dr. R.M. Forbes in 1953. And what Dr. Forbes was doing in the University of Illinois, Chicago, was trying to understand the composition of the human body. And he found that it was 65% oxygen, 18% carbon, 10% hydrogen. And actually more recent studies with more advanced techniques find pretty much the same almost exactly the same balance of elements here. So there's a few exciting things in our body, some mercury, some arsenic, but mostly we're made of the same elements that make up everything else in the world. So doesn't sound that exciting yet. But if you think of where that oxygen came from, let's say, because mostly we are oxygen, the reason we don't all float around the room is because obviously it's bound in intermolecular bonds with hydrogen, and that water is dense. But when our bodies decay and we die, which we all will, of course. And let's just imagine that now our bodies are decaying and dying, and that oxygen is going to spread out of our bodies, and it's going to spread around the biosphere eventually. So just imagine the oxygen in your body is 65%, so that's about 40 kilograms in my body, is going to dissolve out, it's going to spread through the cracks in the doors, out the windows, and up into the atmosphere around the entire planet. So 100 kilometers high, this line of the atmosphere around the entire Earth. I'm going to ask a question. All those molecules of oxygen, 40 kilograms, if they were diffused equally around the entire Earth in the atmosphere, how far apart would those molecules be? We had a similar question yesterday around the molecules of dissolved in water. So how far, does anyone want to hazard a guess? All those oxygen molecules in your body, how far apart would they be if they were spread equally around the entire atmosphere? Anyone want to? 10 centimeters, any advance on up or down on 10 centimeters?
Half a meter, 1/10 of a millimeter.
1/10 of a millimeter, 0.1 millimeters. That's good, okay. That's actually quite close. So the answer is 0.33 millimeters apart. So around the entire Earth, you could take a 1 meter cubed of air from anywhere, 67 kilometers above Beijing, and there'd be 29 million molecules of oxygen that were once in your body. And that's mingling with a dense fog of molecules that were once part of other bodies, of whales, of shrews, of wallabies, of plants. And so when you take a deep breath, you're breathing in a zoological legacy. And Incidentally, if the molecules were dissolved in the ocean, it doesn't make too much difference. It's about 21 million less, 27 million molecules, because the atmosphere is a lot bigger, about 40 times bigger than the ocean volume. At least what I calculated on the back of a post envelope this morning. So our bodies are made of oxygen that was once part of countless other plants and animals. And of course, those molecules pass through our bodies, and the cells in our bodies that they make, our skin cells, our gut cells, our gut lining cells, they're with us for just a few weeks or a few days in many cases. There's this continual flow of matter through the body. And of course, the body's not just human cells either. We've all heard of all the microbiome that we have. You know, in your elbow joints, there's about 420 species of bacteria. Open your mouth, there's about 1,000 species in there. Around the back of your ears, depending on how often you wash, about 125 species. And you've probably heard about in your gut, all that microbiome in there, not just bacteria, but fungi, protozoa, and they are affecting our moods, our personalities, ultimately, whether we're anxious, whether we have lots of energy, etc. So the body, the 37 trillion cells in our body, is matched pretty much by another 37 trillion bacterial cells. But even those human cells that we talk, even the human cells actually were formed from an early form of bacteria being engulfed by another cell, possibly happening in the deep oceans, or maybe on some coastal biofilm, who knows. But this process that occurred maybe many times, that formed the progenitor of eukaryotic cells. So our human cells are actually, we're like a chimera of human and non-human anyway. And the web of life, okay, our bodies are made from these molecules, part of countless other organisms, and they pass through us and they go on to become other animals. Then we say, okay, what is it that defines me, my body? Well, then you could say, okay, it's the DNA. That's what makes it look like me when I look in the mirror, you know, albeit with the gradual signs of aging. The molecules that have been scavenged from the environment are building a body that has some consistency through time. But those genes, the DNA, is just simply borrowed from borrowed from our ancestors, and we'll pass that on to our ancestors to come. And actually, genes don't just travel vertically down the tree of life. They also are transmitted horizontally. So viruses can vector genes across different organisms. So of our 24,000 genes, incidentally competing with the 2 million microbiological genes in our body, those 24,000 human genes, at least 125 we know already are vectored horizontally across the tree of life, jumping across the tree. So it's rather than this idea of a tree, again a metaphor with these distinct tips, it's more like a tangled, you know, network, or, you know. And Lynn Margulis, also the founder of that endosymbiotic theory, which created, you know, described how our animal cells are created. She talks about evolution not being a linear family tree, but represents change in a single multidimensional being that has grown to cover the entire surface of the earth. So I love that analogy, that there is just one life form. You know, our genes, essentially, we have 99.9% DNA similar to each other in this room, but equally with a simple bacteria, 30% of our genes are shared. And they're the same code, it's the same code, like copy and paste, you know. So essentially, this idea of a kind of pangenome that species are kind of borrowed from and adapt and modify and share back out to is probably much more accurate. Now, I've talked about who we are, our bodies, but obviously, you know, our bodies are not just who we are. You might say, well, no, this is who I am. It's me. It's what's in my head, different to what's in your head. That defines me as an identity. But actually, every word that we hear today, every touch, every smell, changes the neural networks in our brains. So we have 150 billion neurons in our brains, and they're changing all the time, literally every second. Thousands of new connections made and lost every minute. And it's, you know, it's true that when people say you're not the same person you were last year, but you're not the same person you were when you got up this morning. Every interaction you've had in the coffee break with each other, we're changing each other's minds on a continual basis. It's not just words either, it's smells and pheromones also change our moods. So that you can do some nice experiments where people are thrown out of aeroplanes, ideally with parachutes on, then you have a control treatment where you make people have some sweaty activity, like cycling in the gym, listening to Bon Jovi. So it's not scary, but you're still sweating. You take the T-shirts of the treatment that people are sweating by being thrown out of an aeroplane, or they're sweating in the gym. You put them together, and you actually put them on mannequins of the kind that dentists practice their dental surgery on. And the dentists make more mistakes when they're exposed to the fear pheromone, the fear treatment. So pheromones, these smell chemicals that are in the room, all around us, influence us below our conscious radar. And then some more recent science is showing that actually happiness and more positive emotions are also shared through these pheromones. So hopefully there's more of those in the room today, and especially all the singing we did last night, etc. So our minds are more porous than we think. Social network theory, I've talked to kind of cell biology, evolutionary biology, a bit of neuroscience, etc. But social network theory is also informing on this. People in networks up to 3 links away that we've never met before can influence our voting preferences, our risk of obesity, our taste in music, and they're influencing us. We've never even met them before. And so one last example, just to kind of try to decompose this myth that we are these separate, isolated individuals. If you think of an inventor, there's often an idea that an inventor, you think of someone, or I think of, someone, a lone wolf in their kind of garden shed inventing something. But actually, all these things, the light bulb, thermometer, telephone, steamboat, were all invented in different places at the same time. In some cases, like the light bulb, patents filed on exactly the same day in different countries. So really, great minds, these inventors, these innovators, yes, they are great minds, but they're not unique. And ultimately, if it wasn't them, it would be someone else somewhere in the world pretty soon. So it's almost like there's this river of knowledge, of culture, ready to birth these innovations. So, just coming back to who we are, if we are, these bodies of which, energy and matter and information kind of passes through us, the boundaries are much more porous than we think. And you might like to think of it as almost like a whirlpool. It's an analogy, a metaphor that's been used before by others, like Gregory Bateson. So in terms of our minds, like a whirlpool, that we take these ideas from others, we kind of change them, adapt them, modify them, when we let them out again into the world. And maybe they interact with other whirlpools. But the whirlpools are all formed from the same ocean, but they're unique dynamic patterns. And in terms of our physicality as well, we're made of these assemblage of molecules that are scavenged from the world around us, with us for just a brief time. And that those molecules, again, will be passed on when that whirlpool dissipates, and will form other whirlpools to come. So we are much more connected than we might be told otherwise. But actually, it's so easy to think that we are these separate, isolated individuals. And it's a bit like an illusion. So here, these stairs, of course, you can't keep going up the same set of stairs and go in a circle. It doesn't make sense. So rationally, we can challenge that and say, this is not true. What my perception is telling me is not true. But that's the nature of an illusion. We've evolved to perceive the world in a certain way. And it's very difficult not to just snap back and seeing it that way, even though we can rationally think about it a different way. So the idea of us being separate, isolated selves is an illusion, but it's also exacerbated by our culture. So it's an illusion that's evolved. Okay, we need a sense of self. I'm not for a moment saying we don't need a sense of self. We wouldn't be able to get up in the morning. We wouldn't be able to track all our complex social interactions if we didn't have that sense of self. And it evolved, so we have it. It's an evolved capacity. But our culture also influences that identity. And whether it's advertising, whether it's social modeling by governments, whether it's our education systems, saying, build a brand, build a personal brand. No wonder if you're this ever-changing dynamic entity, the idea of trying to create a fixed brand is going to create this cognitive dissonance and anxiety. Leaders like Margaret Thatcher said there's no such thing as individuals, no such thing as society, only individuals and their families. Another one of our wonderful Prime Ministers, Boris Johnson, saying greed is good. These idea that we're worth it, etc. And you can do discourse analysis of words in books or songs, and these personal, individual language has become more prevalent over time. So our culture is exacerbating this sense of ourselves as being isolated and separate from the world around us. And the reason I'm showing a burger here is not because I'm cruel and it's approaching lunchtime, but I think there's a nice analogy here with a trait that evolved. This is our trait to hunger after either sugary or fatty food. Now, those foods used to be scarce in our environment, so it made sense that we seek them out. But if you think about our modern context, we have, areas that it's very difficult to buy fruit and veg. You can only buy fast food. It's very cheap. It's also advertised to us, etc. So we have a trait which has evolved, but in the modern context, our culture, rather than trying to sort of control that limitation, is actually exacerbate it. So cultural evolution and biological evolution have kind of entered in this kind of this waltz, which has gone off in the wrong direction, leading to 2 billion of the world's 8 billion people being overweight or obese. So that's the problem when you have a trait which has evolved, it's useful, we need it, but it becomes unbalanced by cultural evolution. And I would argue that our sense of individuality is a useful trait, but in the modern context it's become, in many Western countries, too far. The pendulum has swung too far. So that has impacts on our well-being. It makes sense if you see yourself as this isolated, atomized individual that you feel lonely and separate from everything else, and that makes you feel anxious and depressed. It also impacts our our planetary health. So you can ask questions like this: what's your relationship with nature? And so have a quick think about this, where you would put yourself in this this question. And it turns out that when people see themselves as connected to nature, in the sense that their sense of self-identity overlaps with whatever they conceive of as nature, then they tend to do more good environmental actions. They recycle more, they reduce their environmental footprint, they purchase sustainably. So these aren't just single papers, these are meta-analyses of hundreds of papers now. And it doesn't really matter which index you use. This was a one-question survey, but there are many different types. The link between how we feel our sense of connection to nature and how we act in the world is very strong and well evidenced. And also, I've talked about connection with nature. You can equally talk about connection with the ocean, and we can have a debate or discussion about what's the difference. I'm not entirely sure necessarily, but you can assess someone's connection with the ocean, and that again is a predictor of their pro-environmental activities. So we have this potential for a virtuous cycle where, sorry, the text is slightly gone, but if we restore nature or restore the oceans, people can engage with them in some form, whether that's painting, diving, bird watching, photography, etc. And these activities are well evidenced to change people's sense of connection with nature. So it's not just being out in nature, especially if you're out in nature, looking at your phone or something. You need to be experiencing nature, ideally kind of actively. And these different types of activities, mindfulness meditation as well, changes your sense of identity, makes you feel more connected. And then the evidence shows, a big meta-analysis again, showing that leads to more pro-environmental behavior. And obviously if we have those activities and they influence our choices in terms of how we vote as well, perhaps, then we get more nature restoration. So we have this lovely virtuous cycle. The problem, of course, is that over the last 50 years or so, we've probably been in this vicious cycle where we've degraded nature from our towns and cities, we've degraded nature from our coastal areas, etc. People have less opportunity to do this. Children, less opportunity to engage with nature. They grow up with feeling more disconnected. In the UK, we have one of the most impoverished biodiversity measures by some metrics, but also we're one of the lowest in terms of a sense of connection to nature. So these two aspects kind of again linked in this cycle. So the question is, how do we change that? So there's some resources there if you want to look into this. Because we obviously face this planetary crisis, don't need to go into the details, and it's highly linked to our sense of identity. So how are we dealing with it at the moment? I'm just going to give a little bit of some examples of how I think our current fixes are insufficient, or sometimes even make things worse. And they're detailed a bit more in this book. This is the Nature Delusion book, which I'll reference a couple of times. But anyway, if you're more interested in these, I've just picked a couple of examples. But this idea of technological fixes. Now, again, there is a role for technology in protecting the environment, absolutely. But if we just go with the technology without thinking of the deeper cultural change, we can have problems. And geoengineering is something super worrying. You know, oh, we're facing a climate crisis, let's just put mirrors in space. Or create more whitening of clouds so it reflects more sunlight. Or we put iron filings in the sea and we try and grow more, we change the alkalinity of the sea, or we try and grow more phytoplankton. You know, these are examples which are very worrying in terms of the potential to create changes in weather systems that then affect seasonality in different places of the world, disrupt food production systems, lead to geopolitical conflict. So, you know, these are now being experimented on. The UK has just announced a new program called ARIA, where these small-scale theoretical studies are now being kind of trialled in experiments, etc. But it's very worrying. This is a lovely book, by the way, getting, again, down at this level of why we pursue these techno-fixes. Another form, I guess, a form of techno-fix is this idea that we can just escape to a new planet. Oh, we trashed planet Earth, let's go to Mars, you know, and we'll terraform it. I mean, the work required to terraform a new planet is obscene. Let alone the fact that how many people could actually get there, a handful, and then you leave billions of people left on this planet. You know, it's a kind of ethical dilemma, and it's just crazy that people even talk about this. Or if you can't escape to a new planet, let's just escape into the metaverse, and we can all download our brains into the cloud. But the problem is our minds, who we are, is hugely embodied. You know, a lot of our brain is in our guts as well, wrapped around our guts. So it's our function of how we feel and our personality is a function of our environment. And it's all, you know, on a continual basis, it's the environment around us and how it's affecting our physiology that affects how we think. So the idea that you can just, without all that sensory apparatus, download yourself into a computer, it wouldn't be you. It would be something, if you could do it, but it wouldn't be you. So the follies and the hubris of these techno-fixes. The other type of solutionism that I want to sort of challenge, and again, I'm not against economic solutions, they have a massive role. So paying for ecosystem services, you know, the things that nature provides, can we pay for those, can be very good. So for example, you could have an area where a water company wants to purify water, but it has quite high costs of the chemical water treatment. But if they can convince landowners to transform, you know, coastal wetland areas and up the catchment as well, then that can reduce the water treatment costs. The landowners get some money, but also the biodiversity benefits as a co-benefit. So you get this kind of win-win-win. So there are good examples of ecosystem services, both in terrestrial and marine landscapes. This is Costa Rica last year, engaging with the World Bank on a kind of mangrove protection ecosystem services payment scheme. So not against them, but I think for me they work in closed markets. But what I think is very dangerous is to create open markets, open global markets. This project, Nature Trade, it actually got EU Life funding, which should be for restoring, you know, large areas of wetlands, of woodlands, etc. They somehow managed to get it for this sort of research project where they said they wanted to create an eBay for ecosystem services. So their idea was they go to land managers, they say, did you know you've got all this stuff on your land? You know, you could get paid for this. We'll help you write a legal contract so you could get paid. The problem with that is that when you start paying people for things, you potentially undermine a social norm, that they do it, they protect it for the right reasons, and that it's right to just look after nature because it's part of us and it's part of something we care about and we have a duty and responsibility. There's a nice study, I don't know if you may have heard of all this, but with childcare, and people were picking up their children late from childcare, and so the childcare company said, let's put a fine. So every time you pick up your child late, you get a fine. It went the wrong way. People started picking up the children more late because they just thought, instead of like, oh, I'm 5 minutes late, I better rush because I'm going to put out the child to mind. You know, they've got stuff, they've got their own life, they need to look out. You know, it's just, oh, okay, I'm late, but it only costs this much and I can afford it. Okay, I'll be half an hour late. So that's what happened. And what was happening, the transactional relationship was undermining the social norm. So it's called crowding out of social norms. And it's hugely important whether when you pay for things, you crowd out social norms. You can incidentally crowd them in. So you start paying someone to do something, and then they actually like it. They like seeing the nature around them, etc. Then you stop paying, and then they carry on doing it. But it's hugely important if whether you're crowding out or crowding in. And when this study was funded, it was very unclear. There was just this study which looked at about 10 or 15, I think, studies, and the evidence was slightly on the balance of crowding out. So the idea that you could spend millions of pounds of conservation money writing contracts for landowners to get paid for things, when actually what you might be doing is eroding the social norms of them doing it for the right reason, is just a bit terrifying. So again, I'm not against economic fixes, but this idea of big global markets, and we all know what we've happened to our financial markets. You know, you start out with products that people can value, but then you financialize those markets, they get hugely complex, you get speculation on those markets. So people creating habitats, or supposedly creating habitats, and then selling them on global markets for people to destroy habitats elsewhere is kind of a little bit worrying, potentially. I'm going to give one terrestrial example. About biodiversity offsetting. So this is the idea that you can destroy nature in one place, but you restore it elsewhere. And this was something I was asked to look into in the UK. They were going to build 100 houses here. Or they have built 100 houses here. And anything white or red is houses. And they said that this was going to be nature positive, so it was going to be 20% biodiversity net gain. So in theory, there's 20% more biodiversity in this landscape now. And because this woodland, they said, was poor quality, and they were going to make it to moderate quality. And there was some woodland, this was a woodland, and they destroyed it, but they said it was poor quality, so it didn't matter too much. Now, it depends if you score that woodland as poor or moderate, because if it's moderate, and to make it moderate, it's just a few other very subjective questions. So it gets a score out of 30, and if it's 24, it's poor, and if it's 26, it's moderate. So just a couple of questions that are very subjective, like, is there rhododendron, which is a pest species? Is rhododendron present, yes or no? Well, it could be a whole stand, or it could be one tiny little seedling that you found. You know, you can choose how you answer that question. Now, the consultants who answer that question, the environmental consultants, are paid for by the developer. So, you know, there's an incentive system there, which is not quite right. And if you score this as moderate, these woodlands, then this actually would be 40% net loss. So this scheme could be losing 40% of biodiversity rather than gaining 20% just by a few subjective questions. Now, I want to get it right here. I'm not criticising the idea of having some kind of scheme, but if you don't have the right values and incentives that underpin that scheme, it's not going to work. It's going to lead to the destruction, accelerate the destruction of nature. So it's a bit like saying, let's just have this society of psychopaths, but it will work because we've got the right rules and the right regulations and the right policing. It's not going to work. You need that bedrock of pro-social values. Similarly, you can't have this casual attitude to ecocide that we just destroy nature over here and we'll put it back over here, unless you've got the right values, that the rules and regulations don't work. So same with marine ecosystems. You know, we have these delineated areas of protection zones, marine protected areas, but actually most of them are sort of paper parks. You've probably heard the term. There's not much going on. This report found that I think of all the designated areas, I think only about 0.5 of the sea is actually actively managed in the right way. So even the ones that had management plans, 80% were deemed incomplete or inappropriate. So it's a real worry that you have the rules and regulations, it all looks fine, but under the bonnet you don't have the right values leading to the right actions. So in the last bit of the talk, I want to cover what's going on. Why do we pursue these techno fixes, these economic fixes, at the expense of going a bit deeper? And I want you to transport yourself back now to the streets of dusty Athens, and maybe a grove of olive trees just outside the walls. You can hear the voices engaged in lively debate, because this is the school of Plato, Plato's Academy. And Aristotle trained there for 20 years before he went on and traveled parts of Turkey and Greece, categorizing animals and plants. Incidentally, also training Alexander the Great, who went off and conquered vast swathes of Asia. Aristotle was his categorization of plants and animals formed the first sort of type of logic, or was part of a type of logic where we categorize different things and their relationships by rules, and how those different objects interact by kind of those rules. And that was part of the start of these forms of logic, where we see independent objects and we see how these objects interact with each other by certain rules. And that type of logic, that kind of object-oriented logic, has been hugely useful, and it was developed in the Enlightenment period, and it's what makes modern science. But actually, it underplays the relationships between entities by treating them as kind of separate isolated categories. So in the Enlightenment period, we've already heard Descartes and others, Francis Bacon, etc., who really took this idea that there are these isolated objects. And in theory, I mean, Descartes actually thought that only humans were divine, and that was in our mind, and everything else was just these inert objects, machines. And this idea that the world is just a set of billiard balls, and it enabled incredible cruelty to animals, incidentally. And that object-oriented view of the world, that Cartesian philosophy as well, the dualism between mind and body, is kind of followed through to this day. And I think this is getting at some of the root cause of the culture shift that we need to address the nature and climate crisis. And a way of thinking about this is kind of systems thinking perspective, that you have events in the world that you can see. Maybe, food prices, fish prices are going up on the world market, let's say. And you could say, well, how do we solve that? Let's create some, innovation. Let's create more aquaculture. But actually, you could say, what are the patterns behind that? Okay, it's climate change. So you could say, let's just, put mirrors in space or put iron filings in the sea. But actually, if you go below that, why are we driving climate change and ocean acidification and deposition of nutrients onto landscapes and biodiversity loss, etc.? And it's the way our culture works. It's the mindsets that underpin the economy and our justice systems, etc., our education systems. So this iceberg model is very common in systems thinking. And really, I think I want to talk in the last few moments about getting at this root level, the bottom of the iceberg. Now, IPBES is an agency were tasked with assessing what was going on in nature globally. And their assessment was initially framed, the clue's in the name, from a very instrumental perspective. Nature is for humans, it provides ecosystem services. But when they did their assessment, actually many countries in the global south started to say, well, this is not how we see nature. We see nature as part of us. Rivers, woodlands are part of us. They're part of our ancestors. And to their credit, IPBES didn't kind of steamroll over that with this kind of epistemic colonialism, you might call it, this kind of pushing this type of instrumentalist way of seeing nature. They actually took a step back and did a values assessment. So they said, what are the plural ways that different communities, cultures around the world, whether it's the Maori or the Aymara or the Nguni Buntu, how do they see nature? Of course, they're very diverse, but a common thread is they see nature as an ancestor. And so to their credit, IPBES kind of looked at all these different ways of thinking. This is a nice paper because it shows that actually the experts who are involved in the IPBES process changed their own framing of nature as a consequence of this assessment. Then IPBES went on and did this further assessment, published just at the end of 24, which was the transformative change assessment. So they're saying if we want to transform, if we want to stop nature loss and the destruction of biodiversity and we need to change not just structures, but also the views, world views and practices as well. And they talk about these three root causes: a disconnection from a domination over nature and people, concentration of power and wealth, and prioritization of short-term individual and material gains. These are all things that are very deep in our kind of psyche. They're about our culture. So interestingly, to get at the root cause of the environmental crisis, it's not environmental science we need, it's these deeper aspects of cultural shift. And it's not just IPBES that are talking about this. This is the IPBES quote: pathways to sustainability will require shifts from broad values of individualism and economic profit to sustainability-aligned values of collectivism, care and equality. So you see now why the idea of identity is hugely important. All these other players, I won't read the quotes, but UN Environment Programme, European Environment Agency, IPCC, etc., they all now singing from the same hymn sheet in terms of this need for deeper cultural shift. And some nice reports like this one from the European Environment Agency exploring our fundamental relationship with nature. Essentially ideas from deep ecology coming into kind of mainstream environmental thinking. So these ideas of how we connect to nature, which you can measure in an empirical way, it doesn't have to be kind of, abstract. We can be quite grounded and scientific about this, and then we can explore how this affects the system dynamics and this kind of ability to try and ideally create these virtuous cycles. So one question is, how do you create this sense of connection with nature then? And we've had some interesting talks about this. And we've been reviewing some of the different types of approach. And each of these is a kind of seminal reference, but there's loads of literature on this, incidentally. But obviously, being out in nature, having these experiences is key, but also things like meditation, which actually down-regulates the kind of default mode network in our brains, which is responsible for our kind of egoic identity and this illusion of our separation from each other and nature. But there's maybe a role for technology as well in VR or different apps, etc. And I sit on the fence in terms of, I think, with Josep about how much these distract versus enhance our kind of relationship with nature. But also cognitive interventions. It's not all about experience. So facts and figures and reading and discourse can also change our connection. So one question I have is how you might piece all these things together in a more evidence-based developmental program. Because at the moment, these are all sort of separate fields that are kind of being developed and lots of evidence accumulating about these. But if, for example, the wildlife trusts and RSPB are taking children out in these kind of ways to connect with nature in a very experience-focused way. But if these books also enhance our connection with nature, in my first book I had a survey that you could ask people to do the survey before and after, and it shows a slight significant increase in connection to nature from before and after. Who knows how long it lasts? But again, evidence of this and evidence of this, can we combine these together in some kind of evidence-based developmental pathway that we could refine and evaluate over time and improve the offering and create this kind of wider shift in a development in how we see our relationship with nature, a rediscovery perhaps. So, very last point is sometimes I talk about this kind of idea of inner change, inner development, and people say, no, look, you can't put it all down on the individual. It's these big companies that are destroying the planet. But those big companies, the big fossil fuel companies, etc., they're run by CEOs who are people, and if you can change their mindsets and worldviews, that's part of the solution. I mean, the economy and justice systems, education systems, they're all abstract concepts. They're essentially just made of worldviews, past and future, that become codified into protocols and ways of working. So if you change the worldviews, you can cascade up and change the structures. So the very last thing that we've been looking at in this project, called the Nature-Centric Catalyst, is what are the ways, and we've heard some of this already, but what are the ways in which those very different ways of seeing ourselves in relation to nature or the ocean or whatever words we want to use, that sense of the boundary between us and the rest of the world dissolving. If we make that fundamental shift in worldview, and it could cascade up and change structures, what would those structures look like? How might we manage organizations differently, or think about legal aspects? We give personhood rights to corporations. Why wouldn't we give them to nature? I'm not saying that's the solution. I actually think I have some critique about this as well, because it treats everything as a separate sovereign entity that we have to defend. Imagine how you're going to mow your lawn if you've kind of got this competing rights between the grass and the ant colony and you and the hedge. We have to think of refining this, but maybe it's a stepping stone, because at least it thinks about intrinsic value. What is the value of the ant colony independent of me, or the ocean, or the fish in the ocean, etc. So, what next? One thing I've been working with is this charity, this very progressive charity, who have been thinking about how to redesign organizations and think about what an organization would look like if it really put nature at the heart of what it does. So nature on the board is one idea, that nature is represented in a boardroom. But what about the development of your workforce so that they have a more nature-centric perspective? What would it look like in terms of your the leadership, etc.? So this program, which will hopefully, after this event in October, will be kicked off, is going to take some pilots, maybe 10 or so pilots, where mainstream organizations, multilateral organizations, some involved in maritime trade and others involved in kind of wider environmental protection globally, trying to explore what it would look like to really transform their organization to be more essentially nature-centric. And that is again, another example of that kind of ways that these ideas could cascade up. So on that, I will end there, and hopefully some food for thought. And please come along. I'm actually, I have to go early tomorrow, so if people don't get a chance to chat, I'd love to hear critique or reading recommendations. You can always drop me a line as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much. If you have a question, only one quick. If you don't have the best for now in terms of timing, but it was amazing. Also because you can discuss now during the way or during a small debate this afternoon or tomorrow. So in terms of timing, we have the first bus at 45, so we can go out. We have several good news. So we have for group 1 the lunch boxes, and our amazing team outside prepared snacks for the group 2 and group 3 and so on. So you can pick and get some food before you take the bus or the transportation. I talked already with the ones that were promoted from group 3 to the guided walk, and they will find their own transports. For the group 1, we have the 27 seats of the bus, and we have some rides. So we join everybody at the registration desk to take the first group. I think there's no more questions, and enjoy.
Just this afternoon, after all the field activities, we'll have a debate at the beach. So that will be the opportunity. You, Tom, are going to be at the beach, no? To this. So that's going to be the opportunity to talk with Tom, talk this beautiful, so inspiring talk. Thank you. So we look for a collaborative, participative, inclusive debate this afternoon. Thank you.
Perfect. See you at the beach. Thank you. And thank you.